Yeah, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the MLB Deeper Dive presented by No House Advantage. I am Eric Lindquist. I'm no longer wearing glasses like this morning, so the whole show has changed. Everything is completely different. Our takes are different. Adam has no idea what's going on because, he's just, I don't know. He's coming back from Montana. He's still getting out of vacation mode, I think. Is that kind of what's going on right now?
Yeah, out of vacation mode and into a sport that, I haven't done a lot of work on this season. So, this morning when we did the show, there were 4 different pitchers and I was just I don't know who this person is. So I'm on the fly, trying to look them up. Getting back into the swing of it. Baseball is always kind of, it's easier, I think, to get into the swing of it with baseball than with basketball because it's, you get a lineup, you get a pitcher, you get hitters. Basketball, you have to think a lot more about what's going to happen in that game. So not too tough.
Yeah, so for 15 gamers, though, it's a little bit different. So I woke up at 3:34 a.m. this morning, got a workout, and was like, you know what? Let's get into the pitchers early. Let's get this thing done. And I still didn't get it done before we started the show at 8 a.m. I missed 4 or 5 guys. I completely missed that the Padres were infinity percent owned. So these are things that I'm happy to rectify the second time around. But let's get it started. First of all, No House Advantage, our sponsor of the Deeper Dive today. Over at No House Advantage, they have a little bit different spin on fantasy sports because they're offering player prop contests on NBA, MLB. When NFL pops around, that's going to be a good time to jump in as well. And PGA, all for cash prizes. It's exclusively peer-to-peer contests. You're playing against other people, and it makes it easier for you to win real cash compared to your traditional DFS sites. They have over 500 player prop offerings per day, and at No House Advantage, it's the largest provider of player props in the industry. And the best part is that all users, both new and existing, ooh, that's nifty. I will be jumping in on this. We'll get a $20 deposit bonus with promo code Awesemo. So beat your friends, not the house. Download in the App Store and win big with player props today. Something that I love to target over at NHA today. Something that I'll just bounce it over to Adam as well. But there's some over on 0.5 hits for a couple of hitters. There's also some 1.5 hit props. I think taking the under on the 1.5s, where you're projecting somebody for 4 or 5 at bats. I mean, it's a small sample, but they'd basically be hitting 400 to beat that out. I like the unders on the 1.5, but then I like the over on a couple of the half hit props. I think that kind of works out well. Have you played over at NHA? Have you looked at any of their baseball product? And then do you kind of feel the same way where you think that would be an advantageous way to go?
Haven't played there because I can't for Maryland, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, as far as what you were saying, I think that does make sense. I mean, for the reasons you were saying, it's a small sample, but still, I think over the course of an entire season, if you just bet that people won't average, 400, you're probably going to come out ahead.
I think that seems good. Yeah, that was my logic for it. I basically take all the players that they have listed in some of the better spots facing some of the gas cans. I look at expected batting average, which is not something you look at every single day. And I basically take your top hitters from there. There's a number of spots you can go to on that, but check out NHA today. That's kind of the process that I'm taking. But we got 15 games to get to. We don't have time for a lot of small talk here today, so I'm going to get this train rolling. You ready to go, Adam?
Yeah, let's go.
Let's do it. So we've got, first off, Miami at Philadelphia, -102 here for Miami. I'm just still kind of adjusting all my lineups on the fly here with the Blake Snell news, which we will get to. But on this side, we got Trevor Rogers. We talked about this morning. Really good real life pitcher. It's just such a strange price point to try to get to him. However, over on FanDuel now, where you're not going to be getting some of the savings that I might have been going to for a guy like Blake Snell was sitting around 8,100. Now, I think some of that's going to change and turn into Trevor Rogers or James Caprillion or some of these other guys. And there's really nothing you can knock about his production for the season. He's 87.5 expected velocity coming off of a, I don't even know what I'm trying to say right now. Save me at this point. 330 expected slugging, 29.4% K percentage on the season. These are all good things.
Yeah, for sure. He's been really, really good this year. He's getting guys from both sides of the plate, striking out about 30%, not giving up much power to either side of the plate. Everything looks really good for him, I think, except for the salary. But like you said, on FanDuel, I think it ends up being a little bit easier to get to him now. Even though it's the one pitcher site, he's $1,000 less expensive than he is on DraftKings, and you lose Blake Snell. So it takes one of those viable mid-range options off the board. So I think Rogers does give you, a lot of upside. He's someone I talked about this morning as well, that if his ownership does stay low, even on DraftKings at 9,700, he's projected for 2% ownership. He's certainly one, there's a decent chance he's one of the top pitchers on the slate right now. We have him projected with a 9% chance to be a top 2 pitcher. That hasn't been updated for Snell being scratched, so it'll actually go up a little bit whenever that happens. So, it's I don't think he's quite as popular, or he's not projected to be quite as popular as he probably should be, even when you factor in that it is kind of a difficult price point to get to.
Somebody in the chat said that they're stoked about you having a new hat. I second that. It's kind of nifty. Are we going to get the Live Life hat for the next 5 years?
Probably, yeah.
Okay, that's fantastic. Looking forward to it as well. On the Philadelphia side, Vince Velasquez, a guy that I think I had a little bit more interest in this morning. I think my builds are kind of getting away from him specifically. Maybe a little bit more now that we don't have Blake Snell. I haven't reran my DraftKings stuff, but what are you doing with Vince Velasquez?
I think that it's more or less the same thing we talked about this morning, where it's nice because you get decent strikeout upside from Velasquez, around 26% to both sides of the plate. He's not a very consistent pitcher. He's not a very good pitcher. It's not particularly likely that he has a great start here, but he does become a little bit more useful now that you lost Snell, because when we talked about it this morning, it was kind of like, okay, Snell's the guy that's going to project the best out of these 7 to 8K pitchers. Everyone else, you're kind of just looking at it saying, Snell's not that far ahead of them, so you can use them in tournaments. Now you take Snell out, and you still, this price range is still really useful for building lineups if you're looking to avoid some of those like 2K, not very good hitters. Paying down at, SP2 to this price range makes a lot of sense. So taking, some stabs at Velasquez, I think does make sense. The Marlins, not a great offense, not a terrible offense. It is a good park. It is hot and humid. So it's not a great pitching environment for Velasquez. There is still a lot of risk here, but I do think that he has a ceiling at this price point.
And then hitters. They got Garrett Cooper back in the mix here, but I think it's kind of, if you're going to play Miami, it's going to be the normal dudes that you're going to go to: Duvall, Aguilar, kind of up and down, Jazz Chisholm at the top end. Putting them together in a stack, what do you got? Bibbidi bobbidi boo. I don't really know what else to say.
Yeah, it's not a team that's particularly deep. You do have a $2,300 outfielder batting 5th in Jesus Sanchez, number 10 prospect according to FanGraphs on Miami, not ranked overall. He has 70 grade raw power, which is really nice to see for someone with, at that price point. Not much of a sample at all in the major leagues, but certainly someone that, if you are in tournaments going with 2 of the more expensive pitchers, he's, certainly someone that can help you round out your lineup.
And then Phillies, I don't really have any interest in going there for like right around 3% ownership, and on DK, only a 1.6% stack percentage. I'm not picking on Trevor Rogers. Are you?
No, I don't really see a reason, because not only is he someone that strikes out a lot of hitters, but he does a very good job of limiting power. Only a 137 expected ISO to righties this year, so well below 100 to lefties. So, it's someone where maybe on a smaller slate, I could see taking some shots in this park, just trying to get a home run from someone like Hoskins or Real Muto. But it just doesn't really, it seems like a pretty thin play when you have 30 offenses to choose from and a lot of not very good pitching.
Angels and Yankees, 4.6 implied runs for the Angels, 5.6 for the Yankees here. Winds blowing out to left center. It's 90 degrees. It is humid, over 60% humidity there as well. Andrew Heaney on one side of the mound, Jameson Taillon on the other, from his Pittsburgh days. Not the greatest pitcher on planet Earth, but for whatever reason, also Shohei Ohtani is going to be infinity percent owned, because DraftKings thinks it's real fun to just keep dropping his price, even though he's 5,700 at Tropicana. Now, then he was 5K yesterday. Now he's below 5K for whatever reason, 4,900 for a dude with 26 homers and just smashes the ball to a tune of a 432 expected WOBA, 56.6% hard hit percentage, 25.1% barrel percentage. Jameson Taillon, probably not going to be a guy we're looking at here.
I'm kind of interested. Just because, again, because of Snell being scratched, I think this is a very useful price point in tournaments. But, and the other thing that I think benefits him, we don't have an Angels lineup yet, but it most likely will be a right-handed heavy lineup. Ohtani and Walsh being the exceptions as good left-handed hitters. But Taillon's been much better at striking out righties than lefties, 26.2% of righties this year compared to 23.3% of lefties. He hasn't given up much power to righties, a 140 expected ISO. 261 to lefties. So he's really been hurt by left-handed hitters, which obviously Walsh can do damage. Obviously Ohtani can do damage. But after that, you're not really going to get much from this Angels team. So I do think Taillon is reasonably priced. He's in that same bucket for me as Vince Velasquez, where I'm not super confident, but I do like the price point.
I guess I could see maybe a couple shares of that, as opposed to Andrew Heaney on the other side, who's giving up a 17.3 degree launch angle for the season on average, 43.7% hard hit percentage. He does get some misses, 29.4% K percentage here. Pretty decent walk rate as well. Not that the Yankees are going to go out there and walk. Well, Aaron Judge, Gary Sanchez, Brett Gardner, all above average. Oh, Stanton as well. So yeah, they do kind of get some walks. I mean, this could go very poorly, or if he's racking up Ks, go very well for Andrew Heaney.
Yeah, it's a huge boom or bust spot for him because he has struck out nearly 33% of righties this year, and the Yankees are running out a lineup with 8 right-handed hitters. It's just such a dangerous spot when you consider that it's hot, humid, the ball's going to fly. Heaney does give up power. His expected ISO to righties this year is over 200, and there's a ton of power in the Yankees lineup. So I'm not going to be upset if, across a bunch of tournament lineups, I get to some Andrew Heaney just because he does have a massive ceiling because of that strikeout rate. But at the same time, I think that if I'm going to take a risk on pitchers, I would typically rather just save $1,000 or $1,300 and go down to some of those risky 7K guys, as opposed to paying a pretty healthy price tag for a guy facing this Yankees lineup that has a 5.5 implied run total.
Yeah, and so we alluded to the Angels lineup. I kind of jumped the gun on it, but it kind of deserved it just because I think Ohtani, yesterday, he was the first guy I put in my cash games. I think today he'll probably be the first guy that I put in my cash games in the first base slot more than likely. And looking at the rest of this lineup, yeah, Jared Walsh, a guy that you can definitely isolate in like a 2-man. I don't know how much 5-man potential I really see out of the Angels, but again, it's a phenomenal hitting environment. And if you were going to see them pop, this would definitely be a good spot for it. You're seeing them get a little bit of ownership at 5.7% over on DK, 3.3% chance of being the top stack on the day. Probably getting away from a stack and playing one-offs, but I think that's what everybody's going to do. Are you going to be doing the same?
Yeah, I think so. It's really Ohtani and Walsh that just really jump out to me for the reasons I said when I was talking about Tyon. He's really struggled with left-handed power in particular, and you do have that drop-off in strikeout percentage as well. So naturally, you're just going to look for left-handed power, and Yankee Stadium helps that as well, of course. And then you just get Ohtani and Walsh in this lineup that both have it. There's not much else to see, really, in terms of good hitters or left-handed hitters. So it's pretty much Ohtani and Walsh. We've talked about Rendon before, but not someone that's really jumping out to me here. So I'm much more interested in one-offs or mini stacking with those two than I am going to the full Angels team.
And Yankees, we're still feeling like playing all the dudes, correct?
Yeah, the only thing that's disappointing is that we got Brett Gardner instead of Clint Frazier.
Yeah, that sucked because he was going to be the 9-hole wraparound stack special of the day for sure. That's all. Yeah, we'll continue on. There's really nothing else to say. You just play the Yankees and you move on with your day. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Tampa Bay plus 101 going into Washington, 9.5 total runs here on this spot. We've got on one side of the hill, we got Rich Hill, the immortal, the guy who's, the 50-plus-year-old. He's basically a good Bartolo Colon. Like he's staying solid at pitching and, isn't complete garbage. And, you're cheering for him hitting his first career home run in San Diego kind of stuff. But limits hard contact, 35.9%, hard hit percentage on the season, 25.3% K percentage. A lot of the big bats that sit in this Washington lineup are lefties as well. How do you feel about Rich Hill today?
Not too excited. I just don't really like the price point for him. 9,400 is a pretty steep price tag for someone that typically isn't going to go over 100 pitches. He struck out about 24% of righties this year, which is good to see. But I think I'd just rather go to like Trevor Rogers if I'm in that price range. On FanDuel, I think maybe a little bit more interesting. He's 6,800, so that's a really good pitcher from a talent standpoint to be able to pay down for if you're looking to pay up for bats. The counter argument though is that with every single team playing, there's just going to be enough cheap, underpriced bats that you're not going to sacrifice that much probably to get a better pitcher than Hill. But I do think the salary on FanDuel is worth mentioning, whereas on DraftKings, I think it's really difficult to get there against this Washington team.
Yeah, so the salary, I think, looks a little bit better over there. He hasn't pitched more than 6 innings in his last 5 outings. Hasn't reached that quality start. I think that kind of depreciates his price a little bit over there. On DraftKings, 9,400, where you don't necessarily have to worry about that so much. I will say also Washington, looking at their splits against lefties this season, only a 139 ISO. That's 4th worst in baseball. I think there's a path for him to be okay here, but I just don't think you're going to see him go far enough in these games. He hasn't exceeded 5Ks in those last 5 either. A guy who typically is spinning the baseball quite a bit, if we want to look into that as a narrative too. I think you're definitely on where it's going to probably be more difficult at his price point to get to him on DK. And then FanDuel, it's just the quality start issues. On the other side, Joe Ross kind of getting it going here for Washington. Not so good about against lefties here, but actually been pretty decent outside of, 433 expected slugging, only a 23.2% K percentage. Any interest in Joe Ross whatsoever?
No, not in rostering him. I think he's good enough where I'm not really in love with the Tampa bats either. But between the two sides, I would rather go to Tampa. It is a nice ballpark upgrade for them. You do have some power at the top of the lineup. You have Brandon Lau, Ji-Man Choi, Austin Meadows all hitting the top four. Wander Franco, top prospect in baseball, hitting third at 4,700, covers that third base and shortstop position on DraftKings, which is pretty nice. So I think that I do have some interest in the Tampa Bats, even though I think Ross is okay. I think he has made some improvements as a pitcher compared to where he was at in previous seasons. But he has still given up a decent amount of power. 194 ISO to lefties this year, 157 to righties, but he's gotten a little bit lucky there as well. So I don't mind going to some of these Tampa Bats against Ross.
If you're playing on FanDuel, maybe not. 9% ownership share for them, only a 3.3% chance of top stack percentage. DraftKings definitely going to be my preferred spot for them, as you said. Wander Franco, a guy that I'm excited to finally get to roster here again since the 2K day where he was infinity percent owned, and that was fun to be over the field on that. But I mean, it's just it's been a difficult couple outings here for him getting adjusted back to. He's the top prospect in baseball. I'm not going to get fine tooth comb with him. But on the other side, Washington, I really don't have any desire to be going to anybody against Rich Hill. Do you?
No, not really. He's just not someone that really gives up a lot of power. And then with Washington, you don't have a whole lot to choose from either. Like Trey Turner's really expensive. You could certainly make the case for using him as a one-off at shortstop instead of like a really popular Fernando Tatis, because Turner does give you the really high ceiling. But Ryan Zimmerman's cheap at first base. I guess I could see getting there, but it's just not a team that I'm really in love with here.
Team that I will be in love with today, the Toronto Blue Jays, Seattle, going into Toronto, into Buffalo, should I say, into that AAA ballpark, plus 200 for Seattle. Toronto, the favorite here. I mean, it's nice to see an implied total for 9.5, where it's like almost 2/3 of it made up by one side of the team. But that's what happens when Chris Flexen is on the mound on one end with his 42.8% hard hit percentage for the season, only a 16.6% K percentage. Limits walks, but whoop-de-doo, you're going to get hit up by this Toronto team. Probably not going to be looking his direction. But Robbie Ray, we do have to talk about. 48.3% hard hit percentage is not very pretty to look at, but the 31% K percentage, he's definitely the guy that if you're going to be getting off of the top end, if you're going to not be going to Woodruff as much, I mean, Robbie Ray makes an SP1 pivot on DK that's definitely viable today.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think in cash games, you can get the him plus Woodruff pretty easily as well. It's the strikeout stuff's great, around 31%, like you said. It's a perfectly fine matchup against the Seattle offense that isn't that strong. It's a balanced lineup too, 5 righties, 4 lefties for Seattle, which is noteworthy because while his strikeout percentage is about the same to both sides of the plate, he has given up considerably more power to righties, 223 expected ISO there compared to 158 to lefties. So it would be a little bit scarier matchup if there were more right-handed bats in this lineup. But as is, there's only 5 in there, 4 are in the top 6, but it could definitely be worse for Ray. The strikeout stuff, again, just really, really good. You're seeing him get deep enough into games to justify his salary. That's always been the one kind of knock on him, is he throws so many pitches because he strikes a lot of guys out, but he also walks a lot of guys that drives up the pitch count. But, I think he looks very good here. When you go through the Seattle lineup and kind of look for hitters with power from the right side, which is where Ray is the most susceptible, you get to Mitch Haniger, which, I think is fine. Ty France has some power. Torrens, I think, is a reasonable punt option at catcher, and Moore has some power. So these are guys that can do damage, but overall, I just think there's enough strikeouts here for Ray to make up for it.
Toronto bats, all of them as well. I mean, up and down. I mean, Vlad, it's going to be tough to get to a couple of them just because of how expensive they are. We do want to get up to the top tier of pitching. Looking at their lineup today, though, I mean, Simeon, Bichette, Guerrero. I mean, those are 3 guys that are all above 5,400 over on DK that aren't going to be owned nearly at the clip that they've been in the last week or so. It's a phenomenal ballpark. It's a great matchup. Could they be kind of the difference makers for you in a large field tournament today?
Yeah, I love Toronto here, especially if their ownership stays where it is. One of the nice things about slates that are this big is that, of course, ownership can really only go so many places, and there's a lot of teams to choose from. So we're seeing a lot of ownership go to the Padres. We're seeing a lot go to Colorado. We're seeing a lot go to Boston. All of those make sense to me. But it's taking some ownership away from some other teams that are in very good spots, including Toronto against Flexen, who in his first year back from Japan has really struggled with right-handed power in particular, just getting lit up there. 222 expected ISO, 333 WOBA allowed to righties, 356 expected WOBA, just not getting swings and misses, giving up hard contact, giving up power. And then you get this Toronto lineup that is just full of right-handed power. Bichette, Guerrero, Hernandez, Springer, all these guys do damage from the right side. Grichuk and Gurriel at the bottom of the order are very good hitters as well. Semyon at the top is good. And then you have the one lefty in there, Kevin Biggio, who is nothing to sneeze at either. So this is a very deep, especially 1 through 8 lineup for Toronto that has a ton of power here.
I want to have you rank where you put them in the stack. I mean, I would put them as probably my second favorite behind Houston. Do you have off the top of your head, is there a preference level looking at this stack where you'd put them in tournament exposure?
I would say top 3. I think it's them, Houston, and then, one of those probably top 3 teams, probably Boston.
All right. Good things just to throw out there. I'm trying to make this as different as possible. I'm getting it's deja vu. Yeah, we're going through the same games, but things have changed. We have some lineups out now that we can kind of look at. We have some opportunities to deviate and talk about guys that we might have been a little bit higher on this morning based on ownership. And obviously losing Blake Snell throws a wrench into a lot of what we're doing today. Oh, speak of the devil, San Diego Padres minus 143 going into Great American Ballpark, going into Cincinnati here. I haven't seen the updated line. I don't know if San Diego is still going to be minus 143 here in this spot. I'm sure that's off the board here with Blake Snell. Now it's going to be Craig Stammen. So it's basically going to be a bullpen game here for this team, unless you see something differently. I mean, Craig Stammen's always been a bullpen arm for them. So I don't really see any reason that you would be even touching him. So Tony and Santillan on the other side, going to be somebody that we are targeting heavily. It's pretty much all bats here today. Yes.
Yeah, I think so. Like you said, bullpen game for San Diego, which typically isn't the most appealing thing to target. But we have seen the implied total for the Reds increase. And kind of what I come back to is we talked this morning about how for their salaries, there was a lot of power in the Cincinnati lineup. Now they're not facing Blake Snell, who does give up some power as, a left-handed pitcher, but you're getting probably a little bit more favorable matchups. So I still think that the same point applies. Nick Castellanos is cheap and has a ton of power. Tyler Stevenson batting cleanup at catcher has some power. Eugenio Suarez has struggled this year, but that's reflected in his salary. He's batting 6th. We don't have Aquino in the lineup, which is disappointing, but still a team in a good ballpark where, I think you can chase some home runs with those guys. And then, add Jesse Winker in there also.
Yeah. And I think you're going to have Naquin, you're going to have Aquino, you're going to have those guys kind of pinch hitting in spots then throughout this entire game based on what the bullpen arm is. Is that going to kind of be, a guy like Shogo, I'm not going to even have in my pool because I doubt he gets more than 1, maybe 2 at bats.
Yeah, I think it is a good point. You're not pinch hitting for Winker, Castellanos, Stevenson, or Suarez, or Votto. Those guys are pretty safe. When you get down to Farmer and Akiyama, then you start to run the risk, I think.
Yeah, so that'll be a pass for me. I got to tell you, out of everything that I've seen here in the last couple of days, and this is kind of one of the frustrating parts. I absolutely love getting to write the NBA slate starter and the MLB slate starter, where I get to basically write the night before my initial thoughts of a slate. I get to break down a couple spots here and there, take a look at things. Fernando Tatis was a guy that I try to focus in on maybe one batter that it's you just absolutely need to be focused in on him for tournaments. But then I see what that ownership is coming in at right now over on DraftKings specifically. And it's just really hard for me to want to be rostering a dude who's going to be, it's come down from the 33% that it was earlier, but I guess that's on FanDuel. So he's 21.7% over on FanDuel here at the moment. Still a hefty number, but I'm willing to play that. He's getting almost 30% ownership over on DK. I feel like these are the kind of guys that I struggle with because I don't know if I want to be siding with just going overweight on a play that I already liked coming into today, or do I want to just take the field? And I'm kind of starting to think that I'll side with the field. I'll have Tatis and stacks, but that won't get me to more than 10% of him at most. What are you going to be doing with this Padres lineup and Tatis specifically?
Yeah, it's obviously Tatis is a great play. I don't think anyone needs to be told that. But this, to me, when you just look at shortstop eligible players, to me, this is an example where you can kind of point to the difference between MLB DFS and NBA DFS, for example, where is Tatis the best option? Yeah, probably. But there's so much variance that he shouldn't be twice as owned as Trevor Story in Coors Field against Chase DeYoung. You have Xander Bogaerts on a team with a 6+ implied run total, at 9% ownership, so 1/3 the ownership of Tatis. Trey Turner's at 5%. Bo Bichette's team has almost a 6 implied run total. He's at 3%. We don't know if Correa is going to play, but he's projected for 1% ownership if he does, against Baltimore's bullpen. So I think the ownership gap between Tatis and these other guys is just way too big. Like, there's a very, very, very good chance Tatis is not the top scoring shortstop today, just because that's how baseball works. And so I don't think he should be getting nearly 1/3 of the ownership on a 15-game slate. I think he's obviously a very good play. I fully expect to have him in cash games. I wouldn't be looking to skip him in San Diego stacks or anything like that. But I think especially, if you do have popular pitchers or a popular stack or anything like that in your lineup, using one of these other high upside shortstops, because there are plenty of them tonight, instead of Tatis, is one pretty easy way to differentiate your lineup.
It's just frustrating because I didn't think there was any way at 6K that he was going to jump up that meaningfully, but that tells you the kind of ridiculousness that he's been doing here of late. Obviously, he had the triple home run game where he went bomb, bomb, bomb against Arizona in the first of their 3-game set in Petco, and this is a huge ballpark upgrade. It's an absolute gas can on the other side. I just wish the 6K price tag got more people off of him, but it doesn't seem that's going to be the case. So I got to just kind of take the field. I think I'm going to be following that approach with you. And again, you make fantastic points with that. But the Cincinnati side, it's kind of talked about it. It's going to be a bullpen spot, but Winker, we know the power that exists there. Castellanos, the power there. Anything that you're doing specifically with them, or do you want to move on?
No, nothing really in particular. Just, I think taking some shots at the Winker, Castellanos, Stevenson guys is good. From the Padres side, outside of Tatis, I think Cronenworth looks good. Machado looks good at actually a pretty weak third base position. You and I were talking before the show. Not the best position there. So Machado offers some value. Trent Grisham's pretty cheap. But I think the Padres are still the preferred side here. But I do think that the savings that you can get with some of these Reds bats that do have legitimate power is pretty interesting.
Speaking of savings and third base, we're going to head over to Kansas City here. Kansas City and Boston facing each other in Fenway here. Another just phenomenal hitting environment, it looks like, for this evening. Going to be another ballpark we're going to be targeting pretty heavily here. I'm looking at 90-degree weather. I'm seeing 7 miles an hour going out to right field, 60+% humidity, 4.3 implied runs for the Royals, 6.4 for the Red Sox. Nick Pivetta on one side, Brad Keller on the other. One of these is not like the other. I can definitely tell you Nick Pivetta, 27.6% K percentage on the season makes him somewhat intriguing to me. Brad Keller, I'm just completely staying away. What are you doing with pitching here?
Same boat. I think it's tough to get to Pivetta, very similar to me to Trevor Rogers, where I'm going to be, if I look at some tournament lineups, I'm like, oh, cool. I took a stand and played a bunch of Pivetta. Like, that's cool because it's not a bad matchup. He gets a bunch of strikeouts and all that. But there's just so many, it's kind of a difficult price point to get to. There's so many other pitchers that I think I'll be using tonight that I don't anticipate having a lot of Pivetta. I'm certainly not interested in Keller. Just doesn't get strikeouts, doesn't miss bats. He's facing a Red Sox team with a 6.5 implied run total. Very, very good lineup that they're running out there. So not interested at all in Keller. Interested in Pivetta, but wouldn't say he's a top pitcher for me.
I always think it's funny when somebody asks me something in chat when I've got you here, and it's like, I as much as I like to think I know about baseball, I'm going to definitely give you you're the analyst for a reason because you know things. He said Toro or Suarez at third base for Chief Big Wave with a 1 and a 4 in the middle of it.
What was the first name?
Toro. So Abraham Toro or Suarez. I mean, I got to take the Suarez. I know Suarez has been absolutely god awful terrible, but it's still Cincinnati in this spot. I don't know. I like he's in the 6 hole, I suppose. Abraham Toro, as much as I like the Astros, come on.
Yeah, I'm leaning Suarez there as well. Okay power numbers for Toro, but outside of this year, you have a pretty long track record of Suarez doing a lot of damage. So, and they're basically the same price point.
I just wanted to give somebody a shout out randomly in chat here as we're moving along. Looking at the Kansas City side, I don't have a ton of interest in targeting as much on the Pivetta side, but there's definitely some power that can be found at the top end. Sal Perez, a catcher spot, always viable, hits the ball very hard, 56.2% hard hit percentage, 549 expected slugging. Not your everyday catcher here in Major League Baseball. Jorge Soler as well can be isolated up there. What are you kind of doing with Kansas City?
It's kind of a tough team because the guys that you really want, Whit Merrifield, Salvador Perez, are both expensive in a relatively difficult matchup against Pivetta. Jorge Soler stands out as a nice option at 3,400 batting second. He's had some struggles this year, but he is someone that we know has a lot of power. He's also seemingly gotten pretty unlucky so far. Against right-handed pitching, he has a 156 actual ISO, 218 expected ISO. So, it's someone that definitely does still have power in that bat. He also strikes out a lot. But at 3,400, I think a pretty good pay down option. He stands out to me. And then Emmanuel Rivera, just a 2K play, same thing that we saw yesterday. Third base isn't a very good position. It makes a lot of sense, especially in cash, I think, to just pay down, take the savings there, pay up elsewhere where you have better options. So he's someone I could see getting some ownership, and I think he's definitely a viable option in cash.
I mean, yeah, it's him and Machado, and I don't really see another spot. I mean, J Ram, I absolutely love in tournaments, but I like him in tournaments every single day that ends in Y, which is a lot of them. I believe every single one. So that's definitely a plus. Anything else on the Boston side to really touch on? I mean, obviously 6.6 or 6.4 implied run total. This is actually your highest one that you have on the slate. So we're looking at the top stacks tool, kind of isolating with Boston. I mean, they have the highest chance of being a top stack, just short of 10%. Coming in with lower ownership to that, if that holds true, I mean, I'm going to get, just like yesterday, to a ton of Boston bats.
Yeah, and this is another situation where you want to not only use the top stack tool and get an idea of aggregate ownership on a team, but also individually look at players. Because if you look at the ownership going to Boston, Kike Hernandez deservedly getting some ownership, Alex Verdugo getting ownership as you would expect, Danny Santana as a cheap option getting ownership. Xander Bogaerts is at like 9%. Devers is at 9%. Hunter Renfroe, 3%. Martinez, 1.8%. So you can get some really good hitters from the middle of this Boston order that aren't really that popular. And it makes it so they're actually, I think, a little bit more appealing stack than they would be if you're just looking at the aggregate ownership in the top stack tool. One other thing to point out, and I mentioned it this morning too, I actually think this is a really interesting spot for Renfroe because he's a very, obviously has a ton of power, but also strikes out a lot. Facing a pitcher like Brad Keller that really just does not get swings and misses, I think typically shifts things pretty drastically in the favor of the hitter. Someone like Renfroe that when he hits the ball, he hits it hard, he hits it far. Keller doesn't really have the stuff to make him swing and miss. So I think this sets up as a better spot for Renfroe than it frequently does against right-handed pitching.
Yeah, 3,600. Definitely a fantastic price point for him. Right now, the ownership is not out of control. I mean, it's way, way low. He's actually the lowest owned outside of JD Martinez. There are so many ways you can go on outfield, but definitely going to be an important part, I think, of all the stacks that I am making with this Boston Red Sox team. We'll take a little segue here. So get access to all of the great Awesemo Plus tools and content that we have for nearly every DFS sport out there, pretty much every single DFS sport out there. If there is a DFS contest for it, we have content for it. I can tell you that. That's the Lofty line. I'm filling in for Lofty. I mean, I'm just doing his job here at this point in time. $29.95 for that weekly pass. But if you're a new member, get 25% off of your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum right now with the promo code MLB Deeper Dive. That's all caps, one word, MLB Deeper Dive for 25% off. And also, if you're looking to play only MLB DFS, you can sign up now for our Awesemo Plus MLB Weekly package for only $15.95. Stop guessing, start winning. Join Awesemo Plus today. Next, we have on the board. I'm not going to skip any games this time around. So if you saw the morning show, we'll just scratch all the things that I screwed up there before. Detroit plus 170. There we go. Didn't miss it. That's an important thing to throw in there because Jose Urena is bad at throwing baseballs. 46.3% hard hit percentage, 466 expected slugging. Since nothing changed since this morning, he still only strikes people out at a 13.2% K percentage on the entire season. That's not very good. And then JC Mejia on the other side, I talked myself into this morning, and that's not a happy place to be, but that's just where we are whenever you get to face this Detroit team that strikes out at a 26.5% clip against righties, 90 WRC plus. That's not good either. Talk to me about pitching here.
Yeah, so you mentioned the low strikeout numbers for Urena. It's even worse if you just look against left-handed hitters, of which there's 5 in the top 7 for Cleveland. He's only struck out about 8.5% of left-handed hitters this season. So you're going to be getting the ball put in play. Jose Ramirez, you mentioned in tournaments, I think a really good option. It's just going to be hard for his ownership to get that high because of the salary and because of other spots that people are going to be looking to spend money. So I think it'll be very similar to yesterday where Ramirez just is pretty low owned and you can obviously get very, very big games out of him. It's a very good spot. Pretty nice salary on Eddie Rosario, Ahmed Rosario, and Cesar Hernandez. Bobby Bradley's expensive, but does have power from the left side. Bradley Zimmer, I think, is someone you can use in Cleveland stacks to kind of offset some of the salary that you're spending on Ramirez. So a pretty good spot for Cleveland, 5.5 implied run total, a bad pitcher going up against them in Urena. Doesn't give up quite as much power as I would like, but isn't, he still gives up enough and then just doesn't miss bats. So I think the upside is really high for the Indians.
I just wanted to see what Jose Urania's wins above replacement was. He's actually only at negative 0.4. That's kind of shocking to me that it's only negative 0.4. I guess that is below replacement level player, but that's still just interesting to look at for me. You did a good job of touching on bats there too. Akil Baddoo, we got to still be looking at possibly. That seems a little cashy for me. I mean, I needed him to go off in one lineup yesterday. It did not happen. Jonathan Scope can make some contact here. I mean, JC Mejia, not my favorite dude in the entire world. I mean, that launch angle is nice to see, 2.7 degree launch angle here, limited sample, but I think that this might be an okay spot to go to. The top pitchers tool doesn't necessarily like completely condemn that idea. It condemns Jose Urania. I said before, 0% chance of being a top 2% pitcher, or a top 2 pitcher on this slate. Definitely a no, but any interest whatsoever on going to Mejia here?
Yeah, I just think the price is very reasonable. He threw 92 pitches his last time out. The Tigers only have a 4 implied run total. So you have a team that just isn't expected to score a ton of runs. You have a pitcher that's essentially fully stretched out at 6,100. Decent strikeout stuff in the very limited sample that we have so far. He hadn't pitched above high A ball until this year. 2 starts at AAA and then 5 starts, 8 appearances total in the majors so far this year. He struck out 23.7% of hitters in the majors, 7.5% walk percentage. I'm not going to pretend like he's an elite pitching prospect or something like that, but he's shown that he's good enough to get guys out and to get strikeouts in the majors. And this is a Tigers team that has plenty of below average hitting.
Anything else to touch on from this game whatsoever?
You mentioned Baddoo. He's someone that was showing up for me in some of my top lineups before the show. Certainly viable for cash if you need a 3K outfielder.
It's just not a good feeling. It's really not. I mean, it's like I always look at these 15-game slates and you look at every outfielding option. It's like, I'm going to play Akil Baddoo at this spot. Joy. These are trying times, but it's fine. We're going to keep it going. New York Mets plus 150 going into Atlanta here. 9 total runs here for this game. Where am I at? There it is. It's fun going between 48 different sheets as well, I got to say. But we have Tyler McGill, who I defended also this morning. I don't know if I can keep doing that at this point in time, but I think it's there. I'm just trying to basically find anybody that's cheap. He's 4,900. Sign me up for some Tyler McGill. What are you doing with him?
I think he's fine if you need to go that cheap. I think the counter argument is that there's so many cheap bats on the slate. I don't really know that you need to. I mean, for example, we haven't got to the Coors game, but there's a $2,000 hitter batting 3rd for the Pirates. There's a $3,000 hitter batting 4th. There's another 2K hitter in their lineup. You know, we've already talked about some really underpriced hitters on other teams. So I think that pretty frequently, if you like build a lineup with Tyler McGill for the savings, and then you just say, like, you go through your bats and you say, okay, I don't really need this guy. What can I drop him to improve McGill? You're probably going to find that it's kind of just like unnecessary to just jam all of those expensive bats in on the slate. But if you are, I don't know, stacking like the top of the Toronto lineup with the middle of the Boston lineup or something, then sure. I mean, McGill's 4,900. He's shown decent strikeout stuff in the minors. The matchup's not very good against Atlanta. He's most likely not going to do well, but he's sub 5K, stretched out, and has the ability to get swings and misses.
Charlie Morton on the other side, been very, very good. And now with no Blake Snell, another guy that I think is going to see some increased ownership in some spots, a 10.8% chance of being a top 2 pitcher on this slate over on DraftKings, the only 13.6% ownership. I expected that to kind of be up a little bit higher than where it's at, but we do have a Lucas Giolito who's right there at 8,700, who I am landing on an absolute ton. So this would definitely be a viable pivot to it. Or if you're just kind of avoiding the Woodruff Ray range, I mean, Charlie Morton, all of his underlying numbers this season, 33.8% hard hit percentage, fantastic, 27.4% K percentage, lovely. Not crazy with the walks. I mean, I really like Charlie Morton as a pitcher, just more of a product of this slate for me that I'm not getting a ton of him.
Yeah, I really like him too. And he actually has a little bit higher strikeout percentage against lefties than righties this year, which is something that typically you see from guys that rely heavily on a curveball like Charlie Morton does. You'll see increased strikeout numbers against hitters from the opposite side of the plate. You have 4 left-handed Mets in the top 6 in that lineup. He's got about a 30% strikeout percentage against lefties. And then the righties in this lineup, you know, James McCann, Peter Alonso, they'll strike out against anybody. So it is a really high upside spot, I think, for Morton. I do like that salary. I think you could and this is kind of another argument against that Tyler McGill play that we were just talking about. I'd rather do something, I think, in tournaments like Charlie Morton plus Lucas Giolito. Like, I think you're getting more upside that way than going like Brandon Woodruff plus Tyler McGill.
And because some of these top, maybe this is part of it too, where I could focus on making some of my 2 or 3 mans where I just increase my ownership on Fantasy Cruncher to get more Vlad Guerrero Jr. and more of like these one-off kind of plays where there's high upside bats that are expensive and kind of combining them with some of the cheaper stacks here. Because it's 15 games yesterday, you saw so much ownership concentrated to like Detroit because it was a ability to pay up for 2 very clear and obvious pitchers. You took the Baltimore route, which I think worked out splendidly. And it ended up being kind of the sharp play to get off of a chalky team and just go to another cheap team that could possibly get it done for you at the top of their lineup. But I definitely think that there's some viability to kind of making that work and building a lot more in that middle range on DraftKings of those AK pitchers, kind of finding ways to get up to some bats other people can't by playing Woodruff.
Yeah, exactly. And it's something that we mentioned this morning. When you have 30 pitchers on a slate, there's certainly Woodruff's a great play. Obviously, we'll talk about him a little bit more, but he's very likely to have a good game. But let's say he gets like 23 or 24 points. There's going to be pitchers that beat him. Guessing which ones they are is a whole different ball game. But just when you're thinking about building your lineups and thinking about roster construction from the standpoint of like trying to maximize the upside of your teams, you definitely can see how going the route of like Morton plus Giolito or some of these other mid-range guys and just hoping to get 20 to 22 points from them and have a lot more money for bats does increase the ceiling of your teams.
Oh, you mean that looking at Suarez yesterday for the Angels wasn't a sharp play against the Yankees? Oh, man. I don't even know if he started the game. Did he?
Suarez? No, I don't remember who started.
Yeah, I don't think he did. But anyway, he went a long ways in that game. And I think he was the highest scoring pitcher on DK yesterday.
Yeah, it was Dylan Bundy started.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. Okay. So it ended up being Suarez, though, that I was looking at that earlier today and I was trying to figure out why there was no ownership next to his name. That would be your answer. So thank you for clearing that up for me. That made no sense to me when I was thinking about that earlier. Baltimore plus 249. Your Baltimore Orioles facing Houston, 9.5 total runs here in this spot. The roof is closed. I do not care. I love Houston on this side. Basically, anytime you're looking at a bullpen game, we actually didn't even get Wells as the starter here in this spot. We're getting Lakins, who, I mean, I just know by last name only here at this point in time, Travis Lakins Sr., who seems like he does an okay job just in his limited sample year. Hard hit percentage, 33.3%, but 432 expected slugging, doesn't really strike out bats. This is a bullpen game. That is a fantastic thing to be targeting when it's the Baltimore Orioles throwing it.
Yeah, for sure. We went through it this morning, but they used a lot of their bullpen yesterday. So not that they have many good arms out there anyway, but they also have a tired bullpen now. Going back to 2019, Lakins has been better against lefties than righties. He throws his cutter a lot, which is another pitch that you frequently see actually have more success against the opposite-handed hitters. He's struck out 23% of lefties compared to 19% of righties. 115 expected ISO to lefties, 209 to righties. Doubt he really goes deep enough into this game for stuff like that to matter. But even if it did, most of the power on Houston's coming from the right side in Altuve, Correa, Gurriel. Then you have the lefties with Tucker, Alvarez, Brantley, not really a power hitter, but reasonably priced hitting second. Point being, very, very good spot for Houston. There's some reasonably priced guys in this lineup as well. Tucker and Brantley both mid 4Ks. Toro, Straw, Maldonado at the bottom of the order are sub 4K. So it's not going to be very difficult to get exposure to Houston and to good pitching, as long as you use some of these value guys. You also can just go to the best hitters on Houston and then save some money elsewhere. That's certainly a viable route as well. But I think it is a very good bounce back spot for the Astros here.
I mean, bounce back spot. They still even got up to 7 runs in like a bust game yesterday. It seemed like they kind of snuck it out there on the back half of that 9th inning. We ended up getting Correa in that lineup here today. That was something that we had talked about as possibly not happening. He's there. Makes it a little bit more expensive to jam in these guys, but it might also reduce some of the ownership on a slate where there's more expensive pitchers that we can feel a little bit more confident in. On the other side of the mound, though, Jose Urquidy limiting the hard hit percentage here, under 5% walk walk percentage. Doesn't get the Ks, though, to really be viable for me on this slate, 22.1% K percentage. The Baltimore Orioles definitely better up against lefties here, but against right-handed pitching, seems like 24.9% K percentage. It's only 11th worst in majors. 82 WRC plus means that they're not very good against righties, but just not a pitcher that I'm super excited to roster ever.
Yeah, I don't really like the price point for him. The strikeout stuff hasn't been great. Going back to last year, he's only struck out 18.5% of righties. This year, he's at 25% of lefties, 20% of righties. Gives up some power to right-handed bats. So I do think, once again, the slate is twice as big as it was yesterday. So it's certainly not guys that you're going to be jamming in. But you do have pretty favorable pricing on Trey Mancini, Ryan Mountcastle, Austin Hayes. These are guys that all can do damage from the right side. We know that Santander, if he's in the lineup, has some power. Cedric Mullins has been one of the best players in the American League this year, which is just incredibly weird to say, but he has been. So 1 through 5, if we get like a Mullins, Mancini, Mountcastle, Santander, Hayes, there are cheap bats that you can look to against Urquidy. The thing is, though, like the Orioles as a team are bad. They're unlikely to score a lot of runs, and they're not guys that you should really be using all that much.
Adam, what are you doing with Baltimore? Are you
as of right
Baltimore?
now, I'm not playing them. Hopefully I don't end up playing them.
Okay. Well, I've heard that before. I mean, under 1% top stack percentage. I believe the quote I had yesterday was just play the guys 1 through 4 and drop everybody else. And then sure enough, that ends up winning tournaments and I had 0% of it. So yay for me.
Yeah, here's the difference. And this again goes back to the slate size being so different. Today they're projected for less than 1% ownership, but also less than 1% chance of being a top stack. Yesterday, I think they had like a 2 or 3% chance of being a top stack at 1% ownership. So it was, even though it was still a low probability play, it at least set up as a good leverage option. Whereas today it's kind of just like not that interesting at all.
In Houston, we love all the dudes. Yes.
Yep.
Perfect. That was all I needed to hear. I'm firing them up. That was not going to change. Here's the talking point that I almost missed this morning that is pretty darn important. Chicago Cubs plus 200 going into Milwaukee. You got 7.5 total runs. That is going to be your lowest that you were looking at on the board, tied with the Giants and the Dodgers there in the late night hammer. You got one guy that we just got to talk about a lot here, Brandon Woodruff, starting on that side. I'm just going to kind of skip over Zach Davies. No offense to Zach Davies and his family. He seems like he might be a nice kid. He probably needs to eat a couple more cheeseburgers because he is very skinny. But Brandon Woodruff, 33.6% hard hit percentage, 310 slugging, 31% K percentage, only a 6% walk rate. I mean, everything. He checks every single box, and he gets a Cubs matchup on the other side here. They strike out 26.6% of the time against righties. That is the worst in the major leagues. Only a 91 WRC plus, 177 ISO. What's not to like about Brandon Woodruff today besides price?
Yeah, nothing. I mean, if you just go to like the FanGraphs probable pitchers page, leaderboard, and sort by pretty much any stat, he's going to be like top 1 or 2 on the slate, tied with Ray and strikeout percentage at 31%. He's allowed 0.85 home runs per 9, which is one of the best on the slate. 2.81 xFIP leads the slate. He's just his K minus walk percentage is second best to Kevin Gossman, who's also been fantastic this year. There's nothing really negative to say about Woodruff other than the salary, and that's not a big deal because there are so many cheap bats on this slate. You can certainly get to however much Brandon Woodruff you want. The only sort of caveat or caution that I would put out there is that in these large field tournaments, if you're going to get a lot of ownership going to Woodruff, it does to some extent force your hand on where you can go bats wise. Not that you'll necessarily be forced to like the same stack as everyone else, but you can be forced to like the same parts of stacks. Like if you go Woodruff and another competent pitcher, and then you decide you want to stack the Astros, it's going to force you to use guys at the bottom of the order. Whereas maybe if you shy away from Woodruff, you can get the actual good Astros, or like, for example, the Red Sox. The perfect example is the Red Sox, where we talked about, JD Martinez being low owned and Devers not getting a ton of ownership. Those are guys that you might have to forego Brandon Woodruff in your Boston stacks if you're going to get to them. But given Woodruff's ownership, I think that is a viable strategy in tournaments to just get the best possible stacks and hope that some of these mid-range pitchers have good games. I fully expect to have Woodruff in cash. I fully expect to have plenty of Woodruff across my 150 lineups in tournaments, but I do think there's at least some argument for not rostering the most expensive and highest owned pitcher in all of your tournament lineups.
Yeah, and he's going to be around 20% over on FanDuel with only a 10% chance of being the top pitcher percentage. I mean, for me, it just feels like a spot where if I were making a cash game lineup, I'd probably want to be involving Brandon Woodruff in my life. And go from there. But otherwise, you're giving me basically the field at a 10% ownership discount by basically removing him out of the pool. I mean, I wouldn't probably remove him entirely out of it. We were talking before the show where I was even considering out of my allocations, just going 50% Woodruff, 50% of another guy, and kind of figuring it out from there. Just trying to basically take two guys against the field rather than just Woodruff versus every other pitcher on this entire slate. What would you be doing with him over on FanDuel today?
So, I mean, one pitcher's slate or one pitcher cited obviously makes it a little bit different, but at 11-4 where you have other guys that you can pay down for, Pavetta's at 7,700, Ray is 10,800. I think that you still probably want to roster a lot of Woodruff because you can get to some cheap bats there. There's plenty of underpriced hitters. He's going to go deep into games, but naturally your exposure probably comes down a little bit from where it would be on DraftKings.
Definitely. Cubs, I don't really see any reason that we would be going here on a 15-game slate besides maybe the one off of Jock Peterson or anything. Anything else you would see there?
No, I don't really see a reason.
Yeah, and then Milwaukee. This is Zach Davies. Somebody brought up in chat. Yes, he did start off with 6 no-hit innings against the Dodgers, and then they finished off the no-hitter in his last start. It's Zach Davies. I mean, I can't really be going there in this direct, like whatsoever. 41.4% hard hit percentage, 472 expected slugging, 14.2% K percentage. I wouldn't be rostering him. I don't know. I think we just talked about the pricing being a little bit off with the Brewers where, you're not going to be playing Urias at 5,300. He's not going to be a name you actively click on. I mean, this would be a contrarian stack for contrarian's sake, but would you be trying to force any extra Milwaukee today?
No, I still just don't really like the pricing on these guys. They just don't really have that many good hitters either. And Christian Yelich is priced up tremendously. Urias is, I have no idea why he's that expensive. Adames is expensive. Garcia is relatively expensive. I'm pretty good on Milwaukee.
Agreed. One thing that I'm not good on, I'm trying to work on these segues. I'll figure it out here eventually. But I think one thing that I'm not good on was figuring out prop tools, figuring out strikeouts for props in the betting market and home runs in the betting market. We now have a tool at Awesemo that has been developed. If you're an Awesemo Plus user, the MLB player props tool is fantastic. I've been utilizing it multiple times to be taking advantage of these unders that exist. Now, they're starting to get a little bit more efficient. They've basically kind of skewed them to a place where you can be looking at betting a couple overs. But Caleb Smith specifically, a guy that you can look at for strikeouts to be taking the over on 5.5. We haven't gotten to him yet. A pitcher that's really standing out with a 22% expected ROI over on the tool. The highest on the slate, the under of 4.5. 4.5 is a big number. I've been seeing some 3.5s around the boards now, but 4.5, if you can find that number, that is an absolute jam on the under there. 37% expected ROI. As for the home runs, not the most profitable place to go look at. If anything, it's definitely encouraged me to be very picky about some of the home run calls or picks that I might be putting together in the betting market, in the betting space. But this tool is just so phenomenal. I love all the stuff that our MLB team is constantly working on behind the scenes. We have so many smart guys, the top players in the industry, putting their money where their mouth is with these tools. Definitely check those out, take advantage of them, and win some money around the industry with the help. Click on the Odd Shopper link, head over there and take advantage of the best lines available for those numbers. Next on our board here today, we have Minnesota plus 119 heading against the White Sox, 8.5. I talked about Lucas Giolito earlier. This is just a strange price. And yesterday, he was up over 10K. And now we're seeing him at 8,700, I believe is the number as you're looking over at it. I mean, that is just a drastic difference looking at this pricing. It makes it my favorite pitcher to kind of be going overweight to in tournaments over on DraftKings tonight.
Yeah, I really like the salary there because there's no real reason his price dropped. Like we talked about him yesterday, he hasn't been quite as good this year as he was last year, but he's still striking out 30.9% of hitters. That's the highest strikeout percentage on the slate other than Ray and Woodruff, and he's only $8,700. The Twins aren't a great matchup, but they're not terrible either. Only a 4-run implied run total. Easy for me to say, but
it happens all the time. I've been doing this now for the last 2 weeks where I've been doing baseball shows, and no shot. You're going to do it 48 times before it's all said and done. So it's okay.
Yeah. And he's pretty splits neutral as well. 32.8% strikeout percentage to lefties, 29% to righties, 131 expected ISO to lefties. He's given up some power to righties with a 206 expected ISO, but Not, overly concerning. I don't think the Twins have a pretty balanced lineup. Giolito should be able to work his way through it. I think he's a very high upside mid-range option.
Yeah, and then Kenta Maeda, somebody else that we talked about yesterday as well, before this game got rained out. Obviously, the starts got moved here. I don't really see it. The White Sox, I'm probably going to be choosing some spots here. Kenta Maeda, maybe a little bit of interest that you had this morning. Do you still have that interest now?
Still a little bit, because This is just kind of a mediocre White Sox lineup too. No Yohan Moncada. You have, Zach Collins and Andrew Vaughn have power, but they'll strike out a bunch. It's kind of a watered down lineup. There's, I think, actually a lot of upside here. Not to say the White Sox can't have a big game, because they do still have some power in there, but I think there's actually decent upside here for Maeda. I just think there's a lot of strikeouts in this lineup. I will point out Zach Collins batting fifth. Catcher position, not very good today at all. He's only 2,500. That's definitely a spot that you can look to.
So this morning, I saw the news alert on Zach Collins of the Portland Trail Blazers, and I was like, wait, Zach Collins of the White Sox been playing through a broken foot? What in the world's going on? And then I realized, oh, shit, it's Portland Trail Blazers. That poor bastard cannot stay healthy.
Yeah, he's been injured for a while.
Just wrap him in bubble wrap. Anyway, the Minnesota Twins, a team that I pretty much targeted in every single matchup because they do have that boom bust potential. They have so many guys who can just smack the ball, and there's some upside there with Cruz, Donaldson, Kepler. Kirilloff has a bunch of power, a 60 out of 60 grade score on FanGraphs for raw power. But I can't do it up against Lucas Giolito. I'm definitely siding on it, that side of it. I might have like 1 or 2% stacks because I'm a Homer Twins fan, and I would kick myself if the regular dudes went off against Giolito and I was way overweight on Giolito. But that's just kind of what I'm planning to do today. Do you see anything with the Twins whatsoever?
Not really. I mentioned Giolito has had some issues with right-handed power this year, but the only real spots that opens up on Minnesota is Josh Donaldson and Nelson Cruz. They're both pretty expensive Donaldson at a relatively thin position, but he's at an expensive price tag. Cruz at a loaded position. So, yeah, it's not a spot that I'm going to be that excited to get to.
And the White Sox side, Brian Goodwin, still a hitter that I had interest in this morning. I still have interest as long as he's in the 2-hole there. 3.1K. That's just kind of a number. Put him in the entire bucket of outfielders and cheap plays that you'd have interest in on the other side of Maeda here. The hitting conditions aren't as great as some of the other spots. Still 78 degrees, 86% humidity, so not the worst either. But Brian Goodwin sticks out to me. Collins, we had talked about there as well. Anything else to add? Gavin Sheets, I don't even know who that is, but he is 2K.
Yeah, I just looked him up a minute ago. Not a highly ranked prospect. Doesn't project to have great power numbers. He has 70 grade raw power on FanGraphs, but Steamer projects him for a 147 ISO, which isn't great. Doesn't strike out a ton, but just kind of a guy that's there.
So he's a dude who's there, and then Parra ends up being the guy who goes yard yesterday. So why not him today?
Yeah, so I would say, like, all things considered, price, position, all of that, Collins is my favorite guy from the White Sox. I think Goodwin's fine as well. Andrew Vaughn gives you plenty of power at a $2,800 price tag, but Collins is the one that really jumps out where, like, I could even see him potentially ending up in my cash lineup.
So now let's get a little risky with some pitching here. In this next game that we're going to, Arizona taking on St. Louis, plus 143 Arizona, 9 total runs here in this game. I like Caleb Smith a lot today. Only on the top pitchers tool, 6.8% chance of, or 6.6% chance of making the top 2 pitchers on this slate. Again, it's 30 pitchers on this slate. So a lot of this middle range, I can kind of take it or leave it, but only 6% ownership on him. And really that's what sticks out to me, is that I'm getting a little bit of a discount, getting down to a pitcher who on the season has some pretty decent strikeout stuff. I understand that St. Louis has that power potential with all those righties hitting at the top end of the order with Goldschmidt, Arenado, O'Neill, all of those dudes, but 26.2% K percentage in a spot where I don't know. I just think the price point alleviates some of that risk issues that I have.
Yeah, I'm kind of like, I agree the upside's there. I'm kind of backing off a little bit just for the same reason we talked about. Like, as we go through these lineups, there's so many cheap hitters that you can get to where it just kind of doesn't feel great to say, oh, I'm going to roster this $4,500 guy and play Caleb Smith instead of finding one of the many $2,500 guys and playing Giolito, just, for example, or Charlie Morton, whoever. So that would be like my one argument, I guess. The Cardinals do have a high implied run total at a little over 5, but Smith does strike guys out. The problem is just he walks so many guys, and then you do have a lot of right-handed power in this lineup for the Cardinals as well. So very risky spot. I think he's kind of like, he's kind of similar to Andrew Heaney for me. Obviously very different price points, but kind of the same thing where the strikeout potential is there. It's also just a terrifying lineup as far as having to go up against a bunch of righties. In Smith's case, you get a ton of walks to go with it as well.
Yeah, 103 WRC plus on the season versus lefties, 22.3% K percentage isn't the best to be looking at. That's towards the bottom 10% of where you'd want to be targeting them. So probably not getting nuts with it, but I surely will be overweight, I think, on 6%. I can probably get away with that. I think that's going to kind of be my path to play a little bit more Toronto, play a little bit more Houston, perhaps. But I think you make a fantastic point. I think kind of focusing in on that upper end, and there are just so many guys. I mean, we're clicking on the names of new guys that are all 2K here right now that are kind of getting thrown into the fray. We're getting towards that dog days of summer portion, post All-Star break, where you're going to see all these call-ups, and it's going to get really, really fun. But on the other side of that, St. Louis, Carlos Martinez, he is so terrible. I mean, everything that you're looking at, we have him the under of 4.5 strikeouts for Carlos Martinez is the second best K prop to be targeting using the new player props tool over here at Awesemo. So I think I'm going to be going that direction as well, but zero interest in Carlos Martinez here, correct?
Yeah, I just don't really see it. I mean, if I'm rolling the dice on 7K guys, I'd rather go to pitchers that have been able to get strikeouts, and Carlos Martinez has not.
He just really doesn't, which gotta think Arizona going to be a very contrarian way to be going here on this slate. Looking at the top stacks tool, just under 2% chance of finishing as the top stack, but basically 0.6% ownership. That can't be right. I mean, if they're going to be that low owned, give me some of these lefties. Give me some of these righties. I'm happy to get to a couple of pieces everywhere. I mean, Pavin Smith back in the 2-hole. I mean, not that he's the best hitter in the entire world, but he is 2.6K in that lineup that just hit. I feel like taking him. Eduardo Escobar was somebody that I already had interest in this morning as a one-off at 4.4K. Peralta's all the way down to 2.1K, but he's in the 4-hole now here again today on DraftKings. I mean, there's just so many cheap dudes on this Arizona lineup.
Yeah, the corpse of David Peralta batting fourth at 2,100 as well. I saw it at first, then was like, oh man, that's got to be a mispricing. And then I just quickly pulled up his numbers for the last couple of years and was like, oh, he just stopped doing whatever he was doing. But yeah, I mean, to your point, it's a team that should put the ball in play. They still only have a 4 implied run total. Definitely a team you can look to, though, if you are going the Robbie Ray plus Brandon Woodruff route.
And we talked about St. Louis. I mean, the guys, Goldschmidt, 530 expected slugging, 617 for Tyler O'Neill. Talk about a guy who just hits the gym and just looks like he's going to hit every ball a zillion feet. I mean, he's basically the right-handed, who was the lefty who played for Cincinnati last year, who just wanted an absolute tear, Derek Dietrich.
Yeah, yep.
And he's basically the right-handed version of that playing for St. Louis in the outfield now.
Yeah, he's got a bunch of power. He's still pretty cheap. He strikes out a lot, but that's not really a concern in tournaments, especially. So yeah, you do have a lot of right-handed power in this lineup. Some reasonable prices as well. Goldschmidt at 4,300, Carlson at 3,600 looks pretty good. You mentioned O'Neill at 3,700. Certainly can make a case for Arenado. Yeah, I think the Cardinals, not my favorite stack, but certainly a team that does have a lot of power upside against a pitcher in Smith who is has plenty of blow-up potential.
All righty, let's get to Coors Field. So we get done with all of those 5 o'clock. Well, I guess it's 7 o'clock and 8 o'clock on the East Coast, all of those lock times. And then you get into these little 3-game sets that we have that are on this awkward start times. Pittsburgh plus 162 going into Coors Field, 11 total runs here in this spot. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say other than play some of these cheap Pittsburgh guys. I know German Marquez has not been that bad, but these prices are just so whack for a team that's in Coors Field. And as you said, Ben Gamel now in the 3-hole, 2K. I mean, what is going on? What do we do with Colorado pitching? I mean, is this the ultimate leverage spot by maybe targeting German Marquez?
My biggest concern with Marquez is the same thing we talked about this morning, that his strikeout numbers against lefties are so much worse than against righties. Like, he's sub 20% this year. And you do have 3 lefties in the top 4. But after that, it's a pretty balanced lineup. I mean, you have Ke'Bryan Hayes, but then you have Stallings 5, Evans 6, Newman 7, and then you have a pitcher. So I think it actually is a decent spot for Marquez. 4.8 implied run total for the Pirates is pretty low for a Coors Field run total. So I don't mind Marquez. I still think I would rather just find money for Morton, find money for Giolito. But I'm not going to talk anyone off of Marquez because he is a good pitcher. It is a pretty bad Pirates lineup. I think it's an okay spot. And you will be getting some ownership going to the Pirates as well, so it does work in terms of leverage.
You got to be playing some of those guys in cash, though. Yes, Ben Gamel, like one of the first dudes in for sure.
Yeah, the pricing is going to kind of ruin cash games, I think. Like Ben Gamel at 2K batting third in Coors Field. Just put him in your lineup. Gregory Polanco at 3K batting fourth. certainly a strong option as well. Jacob Stallings at 3,100 at catcher is a reasonable option. There's a lot of guys from the Pirates that I think probably show up in cash builds that maybe I wouldn't be too excited to get to in tournaments.
I mean, even in tournaments, though, you've got batting 3 through 8. I know FanDuel, the prices are a little bit more appropriate, but it's Coors Field 3 through 8, not a single batter over 3.1K. Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah, I don't know. Did DraftKings not know this game was in Coors, or it's actually probably more likely they didn't know that 5 of these guys were in the major leagues.
Yeah, that's definitely kind of a little bit more appropriate. As for the Colorado Rockies, I mean, you're looking at a team that I don't really see how I won't have exposure there. And right now, for whatever reason, I mean, Colorado has been abysmal. I will not say anything or try to defend them against right-handed pitching this entire season. I mean, only a 139 ISO. That's unforgivable playing in Coors. 70 WRC plus doesn't even look like a real number up against right-handed. That's the worst by 11 in Major League Baseball. But this is Coors Field. And on the other side of the mound, you have Chase DeYoung, 43.7% hard hit percentage, 472 expected slugging on the season. We got to have some interest in Rockies here and going overweight to that low number, right?
Yeah, without a doubt. From a cash standpoint, you have Jonathan Daza, 3,100 batting second on a team with a 6.5 implied run total. That's someone that's going to show up in cash lineups. Charlie Blackmon, certainly a strong option. Trevor Story, someone I mentioned earlier, getting a lot less ownership than Fernando Tatis. Range of outcomes is identical for these guys. Yes, Tatis is better than Story. Yes, he projects a little bit better, but Story's very capable of hitting a couple home runs and stealing a base as well. So I like him in tournaments. I know you mentioned Ryan McMahon this morning. That's a spot where maybe his salary keeps his ownership down a little bit, but he gives you a very high ceiling. Garrett Hampson's a cheap option at second base. Again, it's kind of hard to fall in love with the Rockies because, for one, Chase DeYoung isn't terrible, and for two, the Rockies kind of are terrible. But there are enough good bats here, particularly Blackmon, Story, McMahon in the middle of the order, that I like the upside they give, and then you can get some value elsewhere from a team that has one of the highest implied run totals on the slate.
In Texas, plus 165, going into Oakland, 8.5 total runs here. We have 8 minutes to go. Oh my gosh, I'm going to beat it out. I can't get any crap from Greg. I'm very excited about this. We're actually going to make it. We're going to do it. I don't even know what game I'm on now. Now I am personifying that. What somebody in chat was just like, Eric's idiot routine is getting old. Just stick to the analysis.
You're all shucks idiot routine.
Shut the fuck up. I'm fine.
That guy would love the tip-off show.
He would love. Honestly, I love doing voices. You would love me coming in. I have to do the puppet now that I don't have Spags here. Miss you, Spags. Hope you're doing well, my dude. You are very, very missed. Going over Texas Rangers, Mike Foltynewicz on one side. He is so bad, but this hitting environment is just not good comparatively to this slate. But perhaps that is a good thing. If you want to be targeting a low-owned team with an over 5 implied run total, look to the Oakland Athletics. But on the other side of that, James Caprillion was somebody that I thought I was going to get to a lot more than what I am here at this point in time. I haven't reran anything without Blake Snell and DK yet. I'm trying to host a show and be professional. It's not always working at this point in time, but 19.9 degree launch angle, that's not ideal, but this is the ballpark you want to be pitching in if you're going to be giving up fly balls, and also facing to the Texas Rangers is very helpful too. Talk to me about pitching here.
Yeah, I'm not going to Foltynewicz. I do have interest in Caprillion. Not really sure exactly how much I'll get to, but he is one of those mid-range guys where I think the ceiling is high enough where, he does walk a lot of guys, which is a little bit of an issue, but there's a lot of strikeouts in this Texas lineup. The ballpark is favorable for run prevention because it's like 60 degrees and it's a big park. And Caprillion has almost a 26% strikeout percentage this year. So I think you can make a pretty good case for getting to him in those builds where maybe you're spending like $16K at pitcher and, going some combination of Caprillion, Giolito, Morton, guys in that price range. So I think he fits those builds pretty well. Texas does have one of the lower implied run totals on the slate. There's not a whole lot to be scared of here. The guy that you would be the most scared of, Joey Gallo, also strikes out a ridiculous amount. So even though he can do a lot of damage, he also increases the upside for the opposing pitcher. Yeah,
he gives up one solo shot to him, but that's not as good as getting 2 Ks against him. So, if he goes 1 for 3 and against that pitcher, what do you do? Definitely a good spot, I think, for Caprillion, but yeah, it might just be price point for me a little bit here too. And Caprillion, 25.7K percentage here. That is not too shabby, I suppose. Anybody from the Texas Rangers lineup other than Gallo you'd have any interest in this slate? I would say no.
No, I don't really see much. I mean, it's just not a hitting environment that I find very appealing.
And then the Oakland Athletics, Matt Olson, your ultimate contrarian one-off, coming off of Vlad, who's 6K and will get some ownership. I mean, 5,900 for him against Mike Foltynewicz. If this were any other ballpark in the world, you would feel like Matt Olson would be infinity percent owned in this spot. What are you going to do with him or any of these other Oakland bats as contrarian plays?
Yeah, I mean, if I get to some Olson at 5,900 in tournaments, I'll be more than happy because I think it's a great spot for him. But he is expensive. He's $1,000 more than Shohei Ohtani, which is laughable. So, I don't really care how bad Foltynewicz is. Matt Olson shouldn't be $1,000 more than Ohtani.
And in a worse ballpark.
Yeah.
A zillion degrees. And the 48 different reasons that we have that you would play Ohtani over top of Matt Olson in this spot. But that is exactly why you play a 2% on Matt Olson in tournaments or whatever it'll be. It's going to be freakishly low. Let's round this thing out. Final game, San Francisco Giants, LA Dodgers, 7.5 total runs for this game. A Giants slight underdogs, but my God, I have interest in absolutely both pitchers here. I mean, we're just going to be talking about pitchers. Looking at the top 2%, the top 2 pitcher percentage over on DraftKings here at Awesemo. I mean, both of these guys are just vaulting up the page. And I got to say, Kevin Gausman, 15% top 2 pitcher percentage, only 4.3% ownership. I'm scared about how much Kevin Gausman I'm going to get to tonight.
I really, really, really like Gausman at this ownership. I mean, we talked about him this morning, and it was kind of like, yeah, he's got a path to success. He's really, really good, all of that. But the Dodgers are also good. But man, he's projected for 4.5% ownership on DraftKings right now, and has the 4th highest chance of being a top 2 pitcher on the slate, behind Woodruff, Ray, and Walker Buehler on the other side of this game. Just really jumps off the page as far as a guy that is not getting as much ownership as he probably should. And I mean, you can see why. Like, the Dodgers are a very good team. Kevin Gausman is also a pitcher that until this year, he always had a ton of talent. He showed the ability to get a lot of strikeouts, but he never really put it together. But now he's doing everything that we thought he would do. I get the one knock really on Gausman. Over his last 10 starts, he's thrown 100 pitches once. That was in his last start. Other than that, he hasn't gotten to 100 pitches, but he's still been efficient enough. Going 6+ innings in most of those starts, getting 7, 8 in a couple of them. As I mentioned it earlier, has the best strikeout minus walk percentage on the slate, the 4th highest strikeout percentage overall. And he does give you a bit of a discount. He's $1,400 less expensive than Woodruff on DraftKings. He's $900 less expensive than Robbie Ray. With the ownership where it is, I think Kevin Gausman is a really, really good tournament option.
And then on the other side of it too, another good tournament option or just overall option, I would say, you've got Walker Buehler, who 88.3 mile per hour expected velocity or average expected velocity there, 25.2% K percentage, low walk rate, pretty much checks a lot of the boxes and boom or bust spot. I mean, the Giants have been exceeding expectations at every single turn this season, but still got to like a little bit of Walker Buehler here. Not getting crazy with him. I would just prefer the leverage with Kevin Gausman.
Yeah, and the one, I guess, kind of knock on Buehler, he doesn't have quite the same strikeout stuff that the other guys have. Ray and Woodruff both at 31%, Giolito and Gausman just shy of that. Buehler comes into this game with a 25.2% strikeout percentage, but he's still a very good pitcher. That's still, for one, that's still a good strikeout percentage. 2, he's a very good pitcher, and 3, the matchup against the Giants is a pretty good one. So I'm still interested in Buehler, but as you said, when you look at the ownership, I think Buehler is pretty much getting what he should. I think it looks like people are just going to ignore Kevin Gausman, and he's one of the best pitchers on this slate.
Yeah, it's sneaky good. Sneaky good. San Francisco is against righties, 112 WRC plus. I think it was Gundacker that talked about how he was always targeting San Francisco Giants against lefties because of some of the power that existed there with guys like Posey or Wilmer Flores or Solano or whomever else he was looking at. I think it could be said that they're just decent against both sides of it here. But the K percentage is still there up against them as well. 25.9% K percentage against righties this season. That is the 5th worst in baseball. But talk to me about the lineups. Any interest that you could have in going to hitters here on either side? I feel like there's so many other game environments that might just be a pass for you.
Yeah, it's pretty much a pass. I mean, of course, the Dodgers have a lot of really good hitters, but beyond that, there's no analysis that makes me think they're going to have a lot of success here.
Any final words for everybody? Man, we got 15 games done in less than 75 minutes. It's amazing what happens when you start on time, Adam.
Yeah, it's crazy how efficient we can be.
Was very efficient. We love you, Tyler. You're very much appreciated. Jordan Klein, fantastic work behind the glass. We have coming up right now, right after us here, Greg and Terry on Live Before Lock. They're going to be taking you all the way up to lock. NBA Live Before Lock as well, coming up at 7:15 p.m. Eastern Time. all the way up until the 8:30 p.m. Eastern time tip of the Bucks and Hawks game 4. Go Bucks. That's where my money's at. But what do I know? Hit that like button on your way out. Hit the subscribe button and that notification bell. It goes a long way for us. He's Adam. I'm Eric. Best of luck, gamers.
It is the Awesemo MLB live before lock show. Jordan with the enthusiastic countdown as we are getting into the show. I'm pretty excited today because doing a show once again with Terry T. McBee. Show is sponsored by No House Advantage. Haven't done a show sponsored by No House Advantage in a minute. Also, haven't done a show with you in a minute either, Terry. So how's it going?
Going pretty well, buddy. Yeah, it's been a little while. Have we done a baseball show even? I think it might have been basketball the last time we were together. So I'm not sure if we've done a baseball show, but yeah, happy to be here with you. Psyched to do a show with you.
Yeah, we've done baseball shows together, just not recently. It's been a while since we've been on the schedule together. Now, we've got a lot of games to talk about here, 15. So I think we just kind of get into it. So overarching thoughts on this slate, anything that stands out to you just at first glance that you'd like to make the people aware of?
I tell you, I was trying to come up with a really good angle into this slate for my intro to my article today, and it's just like an everything on the table kind of a day. We've got great pitching options. We've got a really broad mid-range of pitching. We've got a Coors game. We've got a game at the Toronto AAA Park. A lot of offense on the board, some good pitching spots. It's kind of an anything goes kind of a slate. So I'm really curious to see how the lineups come out and then see how the results come out in the end of this one. But I don't have a clear-cut like this one thing is really popping for me on this slate. It's pretty wide open.
Yeah, and that's actually a follow-up I want to ask you because I always kind of find this interesting to see how some people like to handle certain bigger slates. And we have done shows together, but it's always been smaller slates. We never talked about a 15-game slate. How do you go about approaching some of these slates? Because I know for me, and it's different 15-game slate versus 15-game slate. I'm way more spread out than I would like to be today, but I also feel like I don't have that much of a choice given how many pitching options there are and how many offense there are. So what do you do about narrowing your player pool, or are you pretty spread out as well?
Yeah, I'm going to be pretty spread out as well. I tend to get pretty broad in baseball anyway. I want to capture a wide range of outcomes. I have 150 lineups to do it in. So obviously, I'm going to be heavier into certain spots than others. But I like to get to a little sampling of as much as possible, as much of the realistic expectations as possible. And on a slate like this, like normally I'll tighten the pitching pool at least a little bit. But on a slate with this many options, I think it just makes sense to spread out some, get away from some of the guys who are over leveraged and drawing more ownership than their probability of success on the top starters tool, and then spreading it into some of these guys who clearly look pretty underowned on this slate, I think is a really great way to approach it. And then that opens up natural avenues to some of the lower owned hitting because you've got more money to spend.
All right. And we're going to talk about those pitchers in a second because I think it is where we should start. But first, guys, today's show is sponsored by No House Advantage. Different way to play DFS. So instead of just playing lineups with, a salary cap like FanDuel or DraftKings, we're building lineups based on different props. You build a card based on different pops, and you're going to label them on a confidence interval, 1 to 10, 10 being the one you're most confident. You hit that, you get 10 points. So go check that out. Download the No House Advantage app. If you are new, use the promo code Awesemo, and you get a $20 deposit on your first $20 bonus on your first deposit. So go check that out. Download No House Advantage. Check out the site. So Terry, let's talk about some of these pitchers here. And just right at the top, for me, the guy that I have the most exposure to, I don't think it should really come as too much of a surprise. Brandon Woodruff. The field is also heavy on him. I'm overweight to the field on him so far, and I have been paying pretty close attention to some of the recent results we've gotten from pitchers. Not something I do in general, but we've never had like rules change in the middle of a season before. And so, it is encouraging to see that the last time he was out, really favorable matchup against the Arizona Diamondbacks, but 7 innings, 9 strikeouts for Brandon Woodruff. Also today, going against the Cubs offense, it's a little bit weaker than we're used to seeing. No Chris Bryant in the lineup, no Anthony Rizzo. So I'm starting my lineups. Brandon Woodruff, the guy that I'm paying up for the most. Is he also your highest rostered pitchers, or somebody else you're getting to a lot of?
He's coming up the highest in crunches. I've got him capped in the high 20s, and he's coming up in like the low 20s in the crunch. He'll probably be lower than that when he goes through the wash in my process, but I expect he'll be at least in my top 2 or 3 highest owned pitchers, if not the highest owned guy. I like the spot going in, and now I like the spot even more now that we're getting the watered down version of the Cubbies lineup. So it was a spot I was definitely considering getting overweight to the field on anyway. In general, he's been just really, really good. 31% strikeout rate this year over 95 innings, 2.81 xFIP. Lots of love there. And the Cubbies lineup, great runs, 8% worse than average in the split. They hit for some power with a 180 team ISO, a 4.34 home run rate. But that's for the active roster. This watered down version, you're getting a worse version of the Cubs lineup. So it bolstered the play for me for sure.
Yeah, and a lot of times on these bigger slates, we'll see pitchers that are projected for a lot of ownership. And you look at our top pitchers tool, and they won't necessarily have, as good odds of being a top pitcher as what their ownership indicates. But, Brandon Woodruff today, at least for DraftKings purposes, we have him projected for around 40% ownership, but over 30% chance of being the top 2 scoring pitchers on slate. That's really significant for a 15-game slate. At the very least, Brandon Woodruff has a massive amount of floor, and it's hard for me to really see him destroying lineups just unless he just has a totally, way off base game. But if you look at his stats this year, that generally hasn't happened. He had 1 game where he pitched in Colorado. He scored 7 fantasy points. Other than that, he scored at least 19 or more fantasy points at every single start this year. So, the floor is really high for Brandon Woodruff. If a cheaper offense happens to go off, I would think that Brandon Woodruff pretty likely ended up in the optimal lineup. But talk to me about some of these other pay-up options at pitcher in lineups who aren't going to Woodruff. Who are some of the guys you might be honing in on?
So, Robbie Ray, of course, is on the board. It is a pretty favorable matchup against the Mariners here. And as we're looking at the top pitchers tool, it is important to note the difference between sites with Brandon Woodruff in particular. Those numbers change a little bit. He's owned about double, a little bit more than double what his probability of being the top individual starter on FanDuel is. So it's a little bit different of a place. Some of these other guys are a little bit closer to him on the FanDuel slate, and you're getting them around level ownership with some of the guys I'm about to mention, like Robbie Ray, like Walker Buehler in that spot against San Francisco, who is a deadly team in terms of their power upside, but strikes out a lot against right-handed pitching. We've got Luke Giolito on the board in maybe a sneaky spot that people aren't really thinking about. I didn't see it talk too much around the industry today. I think Gausman is going significantly under-owned. The other guys on the other show were just finishing up talking about that. So I think that's a really strong spot to look to. There's a lot to like on the board. And then you get into the mid-range with guys like Charlie Morton, Nick Pivetta. I don't love the idea of Andrew Heaney in Yankee Stadium, but he's ranking out pretty well in the top starters tool. I really like Trevor Rogers here. I think it's an underrated spot going up against Philly, despite some of their pop. They're kind of an overrated lineup, in my opinion. You can talk about guys like Herman Marquez, despite pitching in Colorado. Caprillian's on the board. Lot of options in the mid range today.
Yeah, Kevin Gausman is an interesting one just because, using our projections, if you throw it into Fantasy Crunch or start running lineups, you're going to get to a lot of Kevin Gausman. And, that makes sense because if you compare, his odds of being a top pitcher to our top pitchers tool, Kevin Gausman does appear to be a guy who's pretty underowned. So right now I am a little bit overweight to him. I do not feel good about it at all because Kevin Gausman, number one, really tough matchup pitching against the Los Angeles Dodgers. But then also he's somebody who, if you look at his spin rate numbers this year, they have taken a little bit of a dip as of late. So, if we look at the peak Kevin Gausman spin rate in the middle of May, he was a guy who was pretty normally at, like 2,000 to 2,100 RPMs per pitch. His last couple of starts, we've seen him more in the 1,800 to 1,900 range. So that's a little bit of a concern for me. He's also changed his pitch mix. So, I'm going to look at the top pitchers tool and I'm going to get a little bit, at least close to the field, to overweight just based on that. But I don't feel good about Gausman at all.
Yeah, he's a guy who I was feeling better about. I feel like he hasn't been available. Maybe they've pitched in afternoon slates or just slates I haven't been playing as much. I feel like I haven't used him recently. He projects to like the middle of my board. I actually have him and Buehler right next to one another. Gausman in the very high 20s in a FanDuel projection and Buehler in the low 30s. They're similarly priced. They're going up against one another. The spots are tricky both ways. It's two good teams. It's good offenses coming back against them. To your point, Dodgers active roster, 22.1% strikeout rate is sixth best in baseball. They create runs 14% better than average against righties. 3.78 home run rate in the split, 3.78% home run rate in the split, 170 team ISO. So they're a little bit better than average in all the categories that I track there in terms of their abilities in the split against right-handed pitching. So I don't think he's safe. I do think there's upside. I think he's been pitching well enough. The spin rate does have me a little bit concerned, though, now that you mentioned it. I actually hadn't checked on him. So that's an interesting call. It is something I've been trying to monitor as well as this crazy conversation's gone on. And yeah, it looks like significant dip, particularly in the slider, which is an important pitch for him. So I'd be concerned about that. The other ones are kind of bouncing around. So it's definitely a concern, something to monitor for sure. I don't know that it's so much of a concern that I would change my projection, but based on my personal projection, he's not going to come up all that much for me anyway. So it would be basically an ownership play for me. If I'm getting to it, it would probably be more leverage based than anything else.
All right. And then one other thing, just because we do have a new tool on the site. We do have the MLB Power Rankings tool, which also you could use for sports betting. So we have also MLB player props. So different ways to bet on games. And we did have somebody in the YouTube chat, Eric Chang, who's saying that he wagered his children's entire future on Arizona plus 143. So out of curiosity, I'm pulling up our MLB Power Rankings tool, and I'm going to see what kind of expected ROI is Eric getting on his children's future. So pulling up Arizona for tonight. By the way, actually, as a stack, I do like Arizona a little bit going up against Carlos Martinez. He's been absolutely terrible this year. Right now we have the best line available currently is plus 142, and that is with a negative 1.1% ROI, but he did get it at plus 143, so slightly better odds. So listen, slightly negative ROI bet there, maybe giving a little bit to the VIG, a little bit to the house, but listen, it's a fair bet. It's not like you're getting terrible odds there. I don't know that I'd wager your children's entire community college future on it, though.
Well, you also get the offset of not having to pay tuition and things like that. So there is an upside to sending the kids out if he has to in a loss. So, it's not a terrible bet. Little hedge there.
Yeah. And for all we know, maybe he doesn't like his kids, right? So that's another angle we have to consider. Also, we just got an Angels lineup. I'm kind of curious to see what's in the Angels lineup. Okay, Ohtani is in. I just thought there was something goofy going on with the Angels lineup. The fact that it's 45 minutes until the game starts and there was no lineup yet. But all things considered, it looks like a fairly normal lineup. We have, Ohtani's in it, Rendon's in it. So I have no clue why they took that long to get the lineup out. I thought there was something like really bizarre coming, but not the case.
Keep me in suspense as to whether min-price Scott Schebler would be in the 8-hole, I guess.
Yeah, that's what everybody was on pins and needles for. I'm just looking through it. Absolutely nothing weird in that lineup.
Totally
so Whatever. All
Understood.
right. I was like getting a little nervous with getting to a bunch of Ohtani because I was like, are they just going to rule him out right forward? And then I'm going to have to redo all my lineups. But no, not the case. So all good. But yeah, so other pitching options. Other pitching options. You mentioned Giolito, and Giolito's interesting because he's somebody else. You talked about the difference in guys in FanDuel versus DraftKings. Giolito's priced up on FanDuel to 9,800, which I think is about an accurate price tag. DraftKings, I don't know why they nerfed his price so much. So Lucas Giolito, who had this same matchup against the Twins, but the game got rained out, and he was, if I remember correctly, 10,300. Game gets rained out, gets rescheduled. Giolito starting again. They open up the price tag. Giolito's 8,700 now. I don't understand why that has happened, but as a result, now Giolito has become one of the most popular pitching options on the slate. So current projected pitcher ownership: Brandon Woodruff 1, Robbie Ray 2, and then Lucas Giolito projected to be the third most rostered pitcher on DraftKings. I agree with you. Certainly in terms of FanDuel, it looks like he's going, about fairly owned. But now DraftKings, where we have him in the neighborhood of 21% projected ownership now, what do you feel about him as a play? He's going to be pretty popular, but also priced at 8,700.
Yeah, it's bizarre that they made that pricing decision. If memory serves, the FanDuel prices, if not exactly the same, it's very close at 9,800. I think that puts him in play given the 7% ownership. So it's not an easy matchup going against the Twins. That's the one thing that I worry about. At 8,700 on DK, I love the price tag. That's something that would have natural appeal, but then you're talking about pretty heavy ownership there on a slate where we've already talked about there's a ton of guys to choose from. So I might look to get away from that ownership and maybe roster some, but undercut the field and just spread it around a little bit more. You're talking about a Minnesota active roster that's got just a 23.1% strikeout rate around the middle of the league, a little above average. Create runs 4% better than average in the split, a 4.22% home run rate, one of the best marks in baseball in the split, a 184 team ISO. So there's a lot of power. There's a lot of upside for the Twins going against Giolito here. Giolito's been very good, 87 and 2/3 innings over 15 starts, so it's fairly reliable. Depth, 30.9% strikeout rate, a 3.55 xFIP on the year, inducing 15.7% swinging strikes, which you got to love. The CSW percent for that number of swinging strikes is a little low at 30.5%, but that's because he doesn't necessarily work directly in the zone all the time. Average launch angle concerns me. 20.7 degree average launch angle, 38.9% hard hit rate is all right. 9.7% barrel rate is also all right. So I think he's relatively safe, but it's not the safeness. Like out of some of these aces, I think the other guys are a little bit safer. So that would be the concern, just walking directly into that much shared ownership on the DK slate.
Yeah, it's I think one of the other things though about Giolito is there's also a pivot point here. So we currently have Charlie Morton, similar price tag, going up against the Mets, and has about half the ownership on DraftKings. So Charlie Morton at 8,800, Lucas Giolito 8,700. I'm pretty even on these guys in terms of ownership in my lineups right now. And Charlie Morton, this is a guy also who, ever since the change in pitcher substance rules, it's not like he struggled at all. His last two starts, 7 2/3 innings, 7 strikeouts, no walks, 7 innings, 11 strikeouts, 2 walks. So last two starts for Charlie Morton, he scored 32 and 38 DraftKings points. There's been no significant drop off for him. He's also going up against a Mets team that he was just able to dominate. And the Mets offense has been left a little bit to be desired this year. Certainly hasn't been as good as I thought it was going to be. A lot of that is because Francisco Lindor has just been such a massive disappointment. But to me, that is the pivot play, is being able to get to Charlie Morton for about half the ownership that Giolito has. That to me is the most direct pivot play in terms of DraftKings and the pricing there. Would you agree with that? Or is there somebody else in that price range you like to get to over Giolito?
Yeah, I like that call a lot on the DK slate, actually. Just looking at some of the pricing, they're right next to each other. I mentioned Heaney earlier, but I don't trust him in Yankee Stadium. I don't trust him with all that right-handed power, even if the Yankees are not very good at stringing hits together. I would throw maybe Caprillion into the mix in that matchup against Texas in that ballpark with all the spacious foul ground in Oakland that plays well for pitching. He's only 8,000, so you're talking about somebody at an even bigger discount. And they project fairly similarly for me in my model. I think we had him on the site a little bit lower, but I would have him in that mix definitely. And then for a more expensive option, but kind of another mid-range name, I would throw Trevor Rogers back in, who I mentioned before. I like that matchup for him against Philly. But now you're talking about a guy who's 900 more than Morton is and 1,000 more than Giolito. So it's a bit of a different tier. Depends on how much we're talking about having to spend.
All right. So, I mean, that's pretty much encompasses all the high-end pitchers. Is anybody that we haven't talked about as a pay-up option, a pitcher that we haven't touched on yet, or Want to get in some of the value pitchers.
What are you doing with Robbie Ray on this slate? What are your thoughts on him, just given the contact profile? The contact profile really concerns me about Robbie Ray. I know he's been great, but he's a guy I just never trust. He's cut his walks like in half from his career average this season. I don't know what he's doing necessarily to pitch this differently, but I don't trust it based on the contact numbers. And I keep getting burned by not trusting it because he's pitching so well.
You know, it's funny. I'm kind of on this. I've been wrong on Robbie Ray for the majority of his starts. There was one start where I was pretty heavy on him just by necessity. It was like a 4-game slate where he was really popular going up against the Marlins, I think it was. And there just wasn't other pitching options. It's like, I guess I have to play Robbie Ray. Other than that, I've been on the wrong side of Robbie Ray for pretty much every single start this year. Here's what I did. I looked at what his ownership was for the field, and I was just like, oh, cool. The field is owning Robbie Ray at 28%. I'll do 28% Robbie Ray just because he's somebody I don't feel like I have a good feel. I don't have a good feel for at all. And also his strikeout numbers are so solid that, you know, if he just pitches somewhat decently, he breaks slates because the strikeouts are all there. He's striking out, 31% of the hitters he faces. And the other thing also that's nice about Robbie Ray this year compared to previous seasons, he's not walking guys anymore. So a 6.3% walk rate for Robbie Ray, whereas walk rate last year was 17.9%. So that's allowed him to work deeper into games at the same time too. It looks like he's a little bit over-owned right now in our top pitchers tool for DraftKings purposes. On FanDuel, we have Robbie Ray going also a little bit over-owned, but it's a decent enough matchup against the Mariners. There's so much upside there. I don't have a good read. I'm just going even with the field, and my night will be made or broken elsewhere.
Yeah. I think I'm going to be undercutting the field, even maybe a little bit more than that. I'll take some of them because the strikeouts are absolutely there. Going up against this Mariners team, the confirmed roster for the Mariners, 25.3% strikeout rate across that roster. There's plenty to love about the upside for the strikeouts, and there's not a ton of power in their lineup coming back the other way. There's a couple guys you can go deep on them, but the concern about Robbie Ray that I mentioned, an 11.1% barrel rate. Is sitting in the 12th percentile in the league. He's in the 4th percentile in hard hit rate with a 48.3, average exit velocity of 91.7 miles an hour is 7th percentile in baseball. So there are some concerns. 24th percentile expected slugging percentage against. Definitely some contact-based concerns, but he projects really well for me. So it's just total mystery for me in terms of what we're going to get from him.
Yeah, and then also I have, it's not a significant investment, but 3% of my lineups are Mariner stacks right now, just where it's thing like, hey, if this is the start of Robbie Ray falls apart, we know what happens when Robbie Ray falls apart. He gives up a lot of hard contact and tends to give up homers. So it's a slight hedge. I mean, 3% of my lineups, it's not anything massive, but that's how I'll play a lot of these 15-game slates anyways. There's a couple of teams who I have significant exposure to, and then there's a whole handful of teams that it's like, hey, they're in 2 to 3% of my lineup. So the Mariners are one of the teams I was at least willing to get to 2 to 3% of as a little bit of a hedge against Robbie Ray.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And you grab that, the upside of all that, those contact numbers that I just mentioned going back the other way. So yeah, get the guys like Kyle Seager in there. Even Dylan Moore is somewhat interesting. So some interesting-ish names in that for a 3 to 5% kind of a stack. All
right, so let's hit on some of these value pitchers now. And this is also one where value pitchers end up looking a lot different on DraftKings than FanDuel, just because so often we have to play a cheaper SP2 on DraftKings. Not always the case on FanDuel, but Terry, I do know that you do play a lot of your action on FanDuel. So are there any cheaper pitchers that you really like and do stand out to you a lot today?
So I think we've got enough to work with in the the 9s and the 10s, and then all the way up to Woodruff at 11. That they're going to consume a fair amount of my ownership. But I've mentioned Caprillion a couple times. At 8,000, I consider that value-ish. So I would definitely throw him into this conversation here. I think you could maybe squeeze some value out of like a Rich Hill going up against Washington, but I don't really trust it. He projects in like the exact middle of my overall starting pitching projections here. Joe Ross kind of falls into that same bucket. So does Nick Pivetta. Those would be the 3 names from that 7 and 6K kind of a range that I would at least have a little bit of faith in. And then if you're a gambling man, there's always Herman Marquez going against the pathetic Pirates, but it's at Coors Field. He's pitching pretty well. The guys on the other show mentioned his strikeout rates against left-handed batters specifically is potentially a problem. I see some upside here, but I also wrote up the Pirates as a potentially under-owned stack given the ballpark on this one. So I might both sides that a little bit. He's somewhat interesting. He's a guy I don't mind going to, knows how to pitch at Coors Field, and has done so successfully throughout his career.
All right. Now I'm going to throw to you some dumb pitchers for cheap that are in a handful of my lineups on DraftKings. JC Mejia, mostly because of the matchup against the Detroit Tigers. That, and I don't think Mejia is that bad. One thing that was a concern with him early in the year when he started is he's basically just an opener and didn't work very deep into games. But there was a big difference in his last start where, first of all, tough matchup against the Twins. He went through 6 innings and through 96 pitches, was pretty effective. I mean, that's probably going to be one of his better starts of the year. Like, I doubt you throw him out against the Twins, 10 times, and it's maybe only 1 out of those 10 times that he goes 6 innings, strikes out 6 hitters, and only gives up 1 run. But overall, Mejia's numbers for the year, they're not terrible. He has a 4.94 ERA. That's not great, but 3.27 FIP. So, that's a little bit encouraging. There is a little bit of strikeout upside with a 23.7% K rate. But the matchup against the Tigers is so good. There's no ownership going to Mejia. And just the fact that he threw 96 pitches last start, something we've never seen from him this year. So I don't think there's any reason to think that he's, just an opener role anymore. I think he's just a full-fledged starter. And given that there's no ownership going to him, it is a favorable matchup against the Tigers. How crazy am I to have Mejia in like 10% of my lineups?
Honestly, I don't think you're that crazy. I'm just looking at him in my model, and I couldn't find him because he was all the way down near the bottom, but that's because my model created only a 2.5 inning expectation for him. If I just double that to 5 innings, he becomes a much more viable pitcher. It projects him into the 25-point FanDuel range. So I have no issues with that whatsoever as a cheap DK SP2 play. I'll roster anybody against these Detroit Tigers. If you tell me you're pitching against them next week, I'll roster you. They're a bad offense. Plenty of strikeouts here. No issues with it.
That would be a bad investment by you, by the way. A couple of reasons. First of all, my fastball, the last time I threw into one of those fast pitch machines, I was able to hit 70 on one of my pitches, and I couldn't move my arm for like 3 days. It was like, when's the last time you've thrown a baseball?
In an aggressive sense like that, it's been a long time. I haven't been to a boardwalk pitching machine in quite a while, but I don't think I even cracked 70 at that point. So it's probably a little low on the velo for me too.
Yeah, it was definitely a UCL injury was involved. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend rostering me, but so that's one of my guys, JC Mejia. The other one, Tyler McGill. So his minor league numbers are also, he's basically free. He's 4,900 on DraftKings. That's the big thing here. If his price tag was any bit higher than that, it's a different story. But, you look at McGill's minor league numbers, they're pretty impressive. And also it's another thing where, we only have minor league numbers dating back to, the start of this year and then nothing from 2020. But, this year, the minor league numbers for McGill in AAA made 3 starts. He had 3.77 ERA. And in AA, he made 5 starts at a 3.12 ERA. What really stood out to me here is the strikeout rate. So in AAA, in those 5 starts, he had 28.3% strikeout rate. And then his AA starts, a 40.4% strikeout rate. And then you have to go back to his 2019 numbers, 45% K rate in AA. Then 2019 in A-ball, 31.8%. Now, the most likely scenario here is that he's probably going to get lit up. But with that in mind, he's 4,900 on DraftKings. That's a really cheap price. The matchup obviously isn't very good going up against the Atlanta Braves, but just that he's so cheap with a little bit of strikeout upside. And once again, somebody that the field is not playing at all. How crazy am I to be playing a little bit of McGill?
Not crazy at all on this one either. He actually, without changing the innings or anything like that, was projecting for a reasonable start for in my FanDuel numbers. I had him at 26.5 FanDuel points. So he was hitting the board for me anyway. I'm not going to roster him on the one pitcher site, even 5,600. I think there's enough value on the board. You don't need to go there. But 4,900 on DK, absolutely, I would grab some shares of that. And this is an Atlanta team that I don't typically like to throw pitchers into. So yeah, I would be enthusiastic about it at that price. Low expectation of any kind of success whatsoever, probably setting money on fire with it. But I'm with you. I see the upside and I see the path to it based on those numbers in the minor leagues, the strikeout rate, the xFIP in the minors in the AA stint over 26 innings this year, 1.86 compared to that 3.12 ERA that you mentioned. So even under the covers, pitching even better than that. So there's a lot to like there. If he gives you 4 or 5 innings and even if he doesn't book the win, I think at that price tag, there's enough where if he strikes out a few of these guys and lasts just a few innings, you're getting your money's worth.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, by the way, now I'm just really blowing smoke up a guy who's in 12% of my lineups now, but whatever. He's somebody the field isn't rostering. I think he's a good GPP play. With some of these young pitching prospects, like also without there being any data on them last year, I always like when guys have a good prospect acumen, But, you look at some of McGill's profile. He's a 6'7" starter who had a 94.7 average fastball velocity in his first big league start. And, maybe he would have been rated higher as a prospect had we seen him pitch at all in the minor leagues last year. He could be a guy who some of the numbers suggest looks like he might have made a step forward, and we just weren't aware because the season didn't exist last year. And, sometimes when somebody's this cheap and there's an unknown factor to them, that in itself, just not knowing if he's going to be any good or not. Maybe he's bad, maybe he's good, but just the fact that he's so cheap, nobody's on him, and there is that unknown element here, I think that's worth taking a chance on him in tournaments. So those are the two guys that I really wanted to highlight from a cheap perspective. Is there anybody, DraftKings or FanDuel, on the cheap end as a value pitch that we have not mentioned you think is worth bringing up?
Just scanning through some of these DK prices. You have any love for Caleb Smith or Kenta Maeda? Kenta Maeda is a guy that I used to get to a decent amount, but he's just been atrociously bad this year. But he's going up against a Chicago White Sox lineup that is probably overrated against righties. Only cost $7,000. The talent's there. He's gotten some bad luck on BABIP. I wrote about him yesterday a little bit, and I'm struggling to remember the specifics. But I think there's maybe a little bit of meat on the bone, but you're taking a big risk with a guy who's not pitching well, and there's plenty of other options on the board. Any thoughts to go in there for you?
So yesterday's slate, prior to the game getting rained out, I was actually on board with you. He was somebody I liked, but also it was because of the context of yesterday's slate, right? Because the pitching options were so terrible. And even though I looked at my numbers like, well, I don't feel very optimistic here. But, the pitching options, like the other guys I was considering, it was, I'm trying to remember even who the guys were. But yeah, like there was just some dreadful pitchers who I took chances on for cheap. And, in general, kind of all the pitchers ended up sucking yesterday. But the difference today is, we have quality pitching options at the top. And then the other thing, too, with Maeda is he's picking up, some ownership today. He's somebody who right now on DraftKings, I wouldn't consider him on FanDuel. It would just be a DraftKings play because we have to roster two pitchers. But he's picking up 7% projected ownership right now. And, I'd rather get to McGill at 1% projected ownership, also for a lot cheaper. I'd rather get to Mejia at similar ownership and also $900 less expensive. Plus, I think Mejia might be better than Kenta Maeda right now. He's also $900 less expensive, and he's pitching against the Tigers, which is a much more favorable matchup than against the White Sox. So Maeda, let's see, what is my actual exposure to him right now? I have him in 2% of my lineups. So, nothing real. I'm pretty heavy underweight to the field on him. Also, if you look at Maeda's numbers this year, 4.85 ERA, 4.48 expected ERA, 5.01 FIP. The real concern here with Maeda is number one, well, obviously he's been bad, but when you start to look into some of the reasons that he has been bad, he's 33 years old now, and his velocity has dipped fairly significantly 3 years in a row now. So, we've seen from 2019 to 2020 to 2021, his average fastball velocity has dipped by about half a mile per hour in each of those seasons. So you factor it in with his age, and then also that he's been hurt a little bit this year. And it just kind of leads me to believe that he's a guy who's starting to lose some arm talent.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And like I said, part of what I loved about him last year, he was just amazing at limiting hard contact against and inducing soft contact against. And that's just totally disappeared this year. He's in the 31st percentile of hard hit rate, 21st percentile expected slugging percentage. He's hitting a lot of barrels. He's not striking anybody out. It's just not there for me anymore. So yeah, it's definitely not a FanDuel play. If you were getting there, I agree with getting under the field to it. That was even a higher number ownership number than I was expecting on DK.
Some quick news here. The start of the Padres-Reds game is going to be in a rain delay. I don't remember there being significant rain risk there. I'm going to pull that up really quick, but I remember looking at the weather earlier and there was nothing that stood out as being massively concerning. So I'm pulling that up. Let's see.
Yeah, 10% precipitation was what I saw. Maybe it's one of those just oddball Midwest pop-up things.
It's shown 5 to 10% chance of rain all day. So, all right, nothing really concerning there, but I know people are going to end up asking about that if they see that, but that's not anything that's going to end up changing my exposure or anything. Not that I'm really on that game as a whole anyway.
I was actually getting to the Padres side of it. They popped out a little bit for power for me going up against Santillan here. So I would probably have some of the Padres side. Not sure about the red side of things. I don't know how much they'll come up in this crunch I'm about to rerun. I just ended up resetting everything in Fantasy Cruncher. So we'll find out as we start talking about offenses.
You know, what's funny is actually because that's a good transition point here, because we did have somebody had, it was Mike Peterson in Premium Slack Chat. I think he also tweeted at me, but it was right as we were starting, so I wasn't able to answer him. He had asked me what my take was on Jesse Winker for today. Obviously, no more Blake Snell in the lineup, so now he's going to be facing mostly the Reds, the Padres bullpen. Here's the thing with the Reds. I actually like them more against Blake Snell than against the Padres bullpen, because Snell has been so inconsistent this year. There have been some positive signs as of late. Not that it matters now because he's not the starter today. It's going to be a bullpen game. But the Padres have such a good bullpen. They can mix and match righties and lefties that, you know, Jesse Winker, he's had a really good year. He's been absolutely crushing right-handed pitching this year. I think he's a nearly 200 WRC plus against righties for the year. But just the fact that the Padres have a good enough bullpen and they're probably going to be able to throw some lefties at Jesse Winker, I don't think this is a great spot. I don't really like to attack the Padres bullpen when they're doing these bullpen games just because of the strength of it. So I didn't make red stacks, but how do you feel about Jesse Winker and maybe that Padres red situation as a whole? Just, I mean, beyond the rain delay, but also with the Padres throwing out bullpen game.
Yeah, so I'm pulling definitely better numbers on the Padres side of things in terms of my DFS projection, my home run model, what it's seeing, and just probably how much I'll end up on either one of these teams. You have the massive ownership number on Tatis in the middle of the lineup. Over 30% on DK is difficult to deal with, 25-ish% on FanDuel. He's challenging, but I do like some of the bets on that side of things. On the red side, Jesse Winker's been one of my favorite hitters in the league all year long. He's not getting rostered right now as far as my last update anyway. I think 4,000 is a fair price. You at least get the one plate appearance against Craig Stammen to start the game, and he could certainly take Craig Stammen deep in that spot. So you're really playing for that first plate appearance, and then it's kind of more of a crapshoot based on everything you were saying about guys coming out of the bullpen. I will say they made it difficult to throw a lefty against him because he's surrounded with a righty in front of him. Actually, he's surrounded by almost entirely right-handed hitters, two coming after him in Castellanos and Stevenson. So if they're going to mix and match, it's going to be a challenge to mix and match him here too many times through the game. So I wouldn't be as concerned with that. But yeah, he might lose a plate appearance based on it. Might lose two plate appearances based on matchup, depending on game flow. But he's an excellent option. And the Reds are under-owned for a team that is going up against an opener into a bullpen kind of a game. There's potential there, but I'm definitely going to be more heavily on the Padres. They're going up against a guy with currently giving up only 13 2/3 innings, so it's a little unfair, but a 13.5% barrel ball rate and a 22.2 degree average launch angle right now. That is prime home run numbers.
All right. So, this is actually so dope. He could basically be producing the show because his super chat here, I think, is going to be something that I was going to hit on next anyway. But first, he did ask thoughts on Mejia for FanDuel. I prefer Mejia more as a DraftKings play when I was talking about him before. But if you need a roster a cheap pitcher on FanDuel, I don't have an issue with Mejia. I'd be a little bit concerned about his ability to make it through 6 innings to get the quality start. But I mean, picking up 3% projected ownership right now on FanDuel, favorable matchup against the Tigers. Seems like there's a pretty good chance that he picks up the win, and he did throw 96 pitches last time out. So I prefer him on DraftKings. I don't mind him on FanDuel. But second part of Soldope's question, who are your 2 favorite overall GPP stacks on FanDuel, Terry?
Ooh, good question. I was getting to some oddball ones earlier. I was getting to the Padres, like I said, so I'll throw them in the mix just kind of based on the power numbers. And I was getting to some Oakland A's, despite the park metrics against. Fulty's just a pitcher that I've been targeting all year long. It's basically rewarded me throughout. He had 1 3-game stretch where he gave up no home runs, but he's a targetable pitcher for power. And I think that team has a decent amount of power in it. Matt Olson is one of my leading home run contenders. He was my home run pick for the day. So that's a spot I'll be going to probably fairly often and hopefully more than the field.
Yeah, so I agree with the Pirates. I like the Pirates a lot. Actually, it's funny. My 2 favorite stacks are going to be the same for FanDuel and DraftKings. I like the Pirates and the Astros both a bunch today. For as good as the spot is for the Astros, it's weird to me they're not picking up ownership. They've been such a chalky team as of late, and they've been crushing in all these spots. And now all of a sudden, people aren't rostering the Houston Astros as much. Like, I don't understand why they're so under-owned for this particular slate. So Houston won them for me. And then Pittsburgh Pirates, just because they're cheap and playing at Coors Field. The Pirates offense sucks. I rarely like to roster them. But with that said, they're playing in Coors and the field isn't on them. They're currently picking up 1% projected ownership on FanDuel. On DraftKings, we have the Pirates a little bit more popular. Pittsburgh is picking up now. Actually, it's gone up a lot in our latest ownership update, so I'll have to roll that back a little bit. So I take it back. Pittsburgh is no longer going to be one of my favorite stacks on DraftKings because I just updated the ownership. And by the way, ownership projections are they are free today on Awesemo.com for the main slate. So if you want to check those out, go to Awesemo, check out the ownership. So, all right. So on FanDuel, at least it's going to be Pittsburgh and Houston for me. Pittsburgh only picking up 1% projected ownership as a team. On DraftKings, Houston's only project for 1.6% ownership as a team. That is a massively under-owned spot. And then the Toronto Blue Jays, as of now, that would be another team that I really want to take a look at because they also only picking up 3% projected ownership. We have them with a 6% chance to be one of the top stacks of the day. There are a lot of good pitchers at the high end today, but like I said, there are some cheaper pitchers that are making it into my player pool today that makes it viable for me to pay up for some of these offenses. So I'm going to rerun my lineups, and I assume the offense that I'm going to be most overweight to are Houston and Toronto. So let's do now, Terry. What do you make of this spot for the Houston Astros?
Oh, I think it's a killer spot. I really like it. I think we're just getting into a territory where they've been so good, so sustainably good, and in so many good spots that people are just getting a little bit of fatigue, maybe rostering them. I don't know if people have decided they don't want to win if it's with the Astros or what the hell is going on. But yeah, the field should be way, way more into the Astros today. The spot going up against the left-handed starter is just excellent for them. They strike out at the best rate in the league against both hands, but specifically against lefties. Top to bottom, I like this lineup. You can leave out Miles Straw and Martin Maldonado from that statement if you want to, but Abraham Toro in the 7 spot gets completely ignored on both sites today. 3,600 on DK, 2,700 on FanDuel. I've mentioned him a couple times. He's got a nice little power profile, a little bit of speed, good hit tool. I like getting to him, getting to Kyle Tucker, Carlos Correa, Jordan Alvarez, Yuli Gurriel. Those guys are all obvious. Jose Altuve up top costs 5,900 on DK, 4,000 on FanDuel, a little bit more affordable, not getting ownership on either site. And the only name in the lineup I didn't say yet is Michael Brantley, so I'll have to throw him into the mix. Having a great year, 344, 388, 502 slash. Only a 158 ISO, but creates runs 50% better than the average in the league. Just an excellent, excellent hitter in the 2-hole there. So really like all things Astros in terms of rostering that lineup. And I agree with you about the Blue Jays as well. I think they're in a great spot, and I think it's probably similar. I think, like I did it today myself when I was looking for which teams do I want to write up today? The Astros again, the Blue Jays again. There's just fatigue on it, right? And I think maybe other guys from other sites are getting that, so maybe they're not getting written up as much. These are smash spots on this slate. Absolutely.
Yeah, and the price tags here, I mean, obviously on the high end guys, Jordan Alvarez, Carlos Correa, Jose Altuve, these guys are pretty expensive, but other guys like Kyle Tucker, Michael Brantley, they're priced 4,300 and 4,400 on DraftKings. Brantley's picking up 3% ownership. Kyle Tucker is the most rostered player on the entire Houston Astros team right now at 4.8% projected ownership. So I don't know if there's been another spot like this in the entire year. I'm overweight to every single player in the Houston Astros lineup right now.
Justifiably so. I mean, you're talking about an active roster with the confirmed lineup, 17.7% strikeout rate overall. And that's including Martin Maldonado's 31.5 in that average. So, I mean, they're just a very good lineup that puts the ball in play. You couldn't ask for better. They've got power up and down the lineup. They've got some speed to mix into things. Total smash spot for DFS purposes today. On the other side of things, does Urquidy interest you going up against this Orioles team at all as a pitcher? We didn't touch on him at all. I don't feel like he's been mentioned.
He's not in my player pool today. Now I know he was very good against them his last time out, but Urquidy's not a guy I've rostered a whole bunch of this year. The reason being is that he hasn't been cheap for a lot of his starts. He's always had a little bit of a price tag to him, and he just doesn't strike guys out. So he's a 22.1% strikeout rate this year. Last year, he only had a 14.7% strikeout rate. For his career, 21.2%. The matchup against the Orioles certainly offers some upside, but I mean, if you look at his price tag, let's see, where is he? So he's 9,500 on FanDuel. That's a steep price to pay. Like the realistic upside in Urquidy, especially for a 15-game slate at a 9,500 price tag on a single pitcher slate, I can't reasonably roster him with that. And then on DraftKings, 9,900. So then you start to look at some of the guys priced around him. It's like, is Urquidy really going to outscore Trevor Rogers, Kevin Gausman, Lucas Giolito, Charlie Morton, Walker Buehler, Robbie Ray, Brandon Woodruff? The odds to me are so low that he outscores all those guys, and he has to because he's priced around all of them, and he just doesn't generate enough strikeouts. So actually, I'm curious, what is the most amount of strikeouts Urquidy's gotten in a single start this entire year? See, he has a strikeout. He has a game with 8 against. It's actually funny. It's only come against good teams. He has a game with 8 strikeouts against the Twins and a game with 9 strikeouts against the Red Sox. But even last game, where he totally shut down the Baltimore Orioles, he pitched 7 innings and struck out 6 hitters. So, it's not like even in that start, he's been pretty reliant on batting average on balls in play. So we had a 167 BABIP in that start. Overall for the year, 237 BABIP. So he's been really lucky on batting average on balls in play, which you have to do when you're not generating swing and misses. So Urquidy, I think he's a quality pitcher, but better for real life than fantasy.
Yeah, I'm with you on that take. He was projecting, it looks like 11th overall on my board on FanDuel, which put him right in range with like the Rich Hill, Joe Ross's, Nick Pavettas of the world. And he's over 2,000 more than most of those guys. It was just a weird fit of a play for me. So I was curious if you were getting to him at all. And I think the same holds true at 99 on DK.
Yeah, it's really just a price point issue. And let's see, got added a couple things in the premium Slack chat, but no real questions that are pressing. If you guys do have questions, definitely at me, at Terry, at both of us. Just throw the question in and I'll read it. But we will definitely get to those. Here we go. Soldope 1234 with, well, he did leave a super chat, but then he retracted it. I remember what it was. I don't know if he wants me to read it off again, but he had asked. I'll answer if you have another question. Soldope, just throw it into the YouTube channel. I'll answer that also, but I'll answer this one as well because I read it before he deleted it. But he was asking which we prefer between Toronto Blue Jays stacks and Boston Red Sox stacks on FanDuel. For me, that is the Toronto Blue Jays, although the Red Sox are a team that I am pretty high on for DraftKings. Let me see where they rank out in our top stacks tool on FanDuel. FanDuel, they look a little bit more just, evenly owned, and Toronto looks under-owned, whereas Boston on DraftKings, the ownership has come up a little bit, but they're still a little bit under-owned. But, I mean, to me, Toronto is a pretty high priority play today. Do you have a strong lean, Boston versus Toronto?
I like both spots. Looking at the top stacks tool, it looks like this is for FanDuel. Oh, excuse me, I'm on the DK one, so let me stall for a second while this pops up. They're getting slightly out leveraged, but it's really, really close. They're essentially owned where they should be, the Red Sox, where you're getting significant leverage on the Blue Jays. So that would just be the natural spot to me, just given that leverage that you've got. You're talking about the 4th most likely team to be the top stack and one of the lower owned options on the board overall compared to that. So absolutely, that's a leverage-based smash spot, and I like the general upside of it.
Yeah, and then so we did amend his question. Then he asked, what if we threw the Houston Astros in the mix? And it'd be Toronto Blue Jays, Houston Astros, and the Boston Red Sox. To me, it's the Astros in that case. Don't want to relitigate it too much because we just talked about them a little bit, but I just don't understand why there isn't more ownership going to the Astros on FanDuel or DraftKings. DraftKings, 1% projected ownership. FanDuel, 4% projected ownership. It should be significantly higher for a team that has just been crushing over the last couple of weeks. They're in another favorable matchup. And the other thing, too, about this Orioles team, who has no good starting pitchers, they don't have good relief pitchers either. So we're in the situation where they've continually beat up the starting pitchers for the Baltimore Orioles. And then you get into the bullpen. The bullpen's probably already worn out because they've had to pitch against the Astros for the last few days. And, there just aren't good pitchers there. So it's bad pitchers who are also worn down right now. So Houston Astros for me there. Pittsburgh Pirates, we've talked about them in passing, but not really at length here. Do you just feel the same as me where it's like, I don't care how good Marquez is. I don't care how good the Pirates are individually. It's just they're at Coors Field and they're cheap. Therefore, I want to get to them.
Yeah, that was kind of the take of when I introduced the stack before I broke it down hitter by hitter, was just like the first sentence it's the heading Pittsburgh Pirates. And then in the words, the Pittsburgh Pirates are not a good team, which is true. This is not a good offense. This is not a good baseball team. Marquez for the season, 23.4% strikeout rate, 3.71 xFIP, a 1.28 whip, inducing 13% swinging strikes, only a 4% barrel ball rate, 4.3 degree average launch angle. So he's been excellent in terms of allowing power, allowing the ball to get out of the yard. It's a Pirates team with a 1.128 ISO against righties this year, 11% worse than average creating runs at just a 2.44% home run rate. And yet I want to get there. I think there are enough good hitters in this lineup individually. I think there are enough ways to string this lineup together in low-owned ways. There's just not enough attention for the fact that they're playing at Coors Field. That's really the only thing I care about here. They don't need to hit a bunch of home runs. They just need to drive the ball a little bit, and they're capable of that. And then as I was writing it up, there are a few guys in this lineup. Now it's a different configuration of the lineup than I wrote about, so it's a little bit changed, but there are a few guys in this lineup with positive WRC pluses. Adam Frazier and Brian Hayes spring to mind. Both of those guys well above average at creating runs. Looks like the rest of the confirmed lineup slipped a little bit below. So you're still talking about riding the top end with like Adam Frazier, Brian Hayes, Ben Gamel, Gregory Polanco. Maybe you mix in some Jacob Stallings, grab some of that power. Kevin Newman is somewhat interesting as a shortstop in there.
Yeah, hey, they're playing at Coors Field. I would roster me hitting at Coors Field. So how about that? But yeah, it's Coors Field. How about on the other side of the game? Because we do have the Colorado Rockies. They have one of the highest implied run totals on the slate. Also a team, though, that's picking up a fairly significant amount of ownership. On DraftKings today, we have them projected for a 10.8% ownership share. So on DraftKings, this is the most popular stack on the slate at the moment, which, Coors Field, not all that surprising. And then on FanDuel, we have the Rockies, a little bit less of an ownership share, but still the fourth most popular stack on the slate, 7.4% projected ownership. So I think that the Rockies are a little more viable on FanDuel than they are on DraftKings, just because the ownership is, about 60% of what it is on DraftKings. But how are you handling the Colorado Rockies on the other side of the game?
Honestly, I'll have some in the same sense that this is a game that's taking place at Coors Field. But with the higher ownership, with the higher pricing on the hitters that I kind of want to get to, the Trevor Stories, the Ryan McMahons of the world, you could maybe toss Raimel Tapia into that bucket. You could definitely toss Charlie Blackmon in there. It's just not a good lineup, and the field's going to be on them a little bit more. So I'm not as enthused about it. This is a lineup that they are against right-handed pitching. They have a 69 WRC plus on the season, the active roster. The next worst team in baseball is at 83. That is a significant gulf between them and the second worst team, let alone the average. This is a bad team creating runs, 2.65% home run rate in the split, a 138 team ISO. To strike out 24% of the time, so there's strikeouts available. Not that the opposing pitcher, Chase DeYoung, is going to get to those strikeouts or give them anything to worry about from the pitching side of things. They could definitely have a good game. DeYoung is my lowest projected FanDuel pitcher here. I just, based on the ownership on the hitters I want to get to and the pricing, would probably lean more into the other side of this one.
Yeah, I have more exposure to the Pirates than the Rockies. I only have the Rockies in 2% of my stacks right now, just because they're going so over-owned right now on DraftKings. So I'm updating my ownership right now just because we do have, ownership update that's in our top stacks tool and top pitchers tool. Like I said before, that is free content up on the site, but also it's something that, guys, if you do want to get access to just all the time, not just when it's free, you can get access to all of the Awesemo Plus Platinum tools. Use the promo code MLB Live Before Lock. Get 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. So that is MLB Live Before Lock. That is all caps, no spaces, and you get 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus. But here's a cheaper stack that I am getting to at a decent clip now. The Arizona Diamondbacks. The Diamondbacks, by the way, no good as a team, no good as an offense. But you know who else is no good? Carlos Martinez. And I feel like there's all these spots that we get that I bring up, like 2-3 times a week, where we get the stoppable force versus the movable object. And that's what happens every time Carlos Martinez pitches. This guy only pitches against crappy offenses, and he never has success against them either. Carlos Martinez numbers for the year: 6.78 ERA, 5.99 expected ERA. The strikeout rate is plummeted to a crazy low number. So just in 2019, Carlos Martinez had a 26.5% strikeout rate. Last year, 16.3% strikeout rate for Carlos Martinez. This year, down to 14.9%. I just don't think this guy is capable of getting big league hitters out anymore. So even his last time out, he was a chalk play going up against the Pittsburgh Pirates. He ends up pitching 5 innings, gives up 5 runs. And let's see, what are some of the other bad offenses gone up against here? The Arizona Diamondbacks earlier in the year, 6 innings, 3 runs. A home start against the Rockies. Just talk about how bad the Rockies are on neutral fields. They'll always get the Coors Field bump, but this was him pitching against the Rockies in St. Louis, 5 innings, 5 runs. So he's had plenty of opportunities against bad offenses. He just generally doesn't come through because he stinks now. So to me, the Arizona Diamondbacks are really cheap, and they're a team that's not picking up all that much ownership, only 2.8% projected ownership on DraftKings right now. We have them with the best odds on the slate of being the top value stack, 13.1%. So I think it makes sense to get to Arizona just to pay up for like Brandon Woodruff, Lucas Giolito, to be able to get 2 studs into our lineups from a pitching sense on DraftKings. So I'm overweight to the Diamondbacks just because of how bad Martinez is. Do you have any interest in the Diamondbacks?
I don't know how much they'll actually end up coming up just based on what the actual projections, the numbers are I feel like whatever gets through the crunch and into my sorting process based on the ownership will probably end up in my entries, if that makes sense. Like it's not it hasn't been a priority for me on the day, but yeah, I love everything about the matchup against Carlos Martinez. You hit a lot of the high points. Just looking at the little handy chart on Statcast where they give you a bunch of different categories by percentile that I talk about a lot. Left and blue is bad, right and red is good. Everything is on that side of the board and in shades of blue, medium blue to a dark blue. Everything is bad for this guy. We're talking about 18th percentile hard hit rate, 13th percentile expected slugging, 34th percentile barrel rate. He just gives up such premium contact. He's not striking anybody out anymore. I think whatever he had at one point, he has lost, and this is a targetable pitcher for sure. I just don't love this offense, and they don't project that well for me, but I do like the concept of what you're talking about.
I like the introduction of the hand motions there. We had this, and they're going this way. They go. I couldn't follow. Like I understood the words, the hand motions, though. I wasn't exactly sure what was going on, but I like it. No, I liked it. Yeah, it was like
I was going to do another one earlier when we were talking about the Astros and the Blue Jays on FanDuel, both being under-owned, both a high stack. To me, that's a weave those guys together.
Yeah, I dig it. Anything to make the show more interactive. We had a little more visuals to the show. So what are some of the other offenses that we have not talked about yet that are popping up for you in a meaningful way?
That's a good question. Let's take a look at what's coming through in this crunch here. So I talked about San Diego. We touched on Boston. Just to reiterate, they're the Boston Red Sox. They create runs like crazy. I think they're a viable option. I'm getting to some Angels, which I wasn't totally expecting, but I think kind of makes sense given the matchup in the ballpark in Yankee Stadium. I talked about the A's earlier. Getting to some Braves in there, which is a little bit of a surprise, but not totally based on the matchup against the Mets rookie. So I think that makes some sense. Just going to sort through this. I'm curious to see how the stacks shake out once I drop it into the sorting tool in the next 2 minutes, as soon as this crunch actually completes. But that's probably going to be the core of like premium options. And then there'll be some Cincinnati mixed in. There'll be some Washington mixed in. I get caught up in some of the power upside with Scherer and the Trey Turner, Juan Soto, the way those guys project in that lineup. So I tend to get to a decent amount of those guys. Not getting to as much Blue Jays as I would like in this crunch. It's around a fair mix because I've got them all set to reasonably low caps on everything, so I get a broad representation. But I don't love where I'm coming up on them, so I hope the sort boosts them a little.
Were you getting to like an alarmingly low number of Blue Jays?
Not alarmingly, no. It's like 7%, where the high team is only 10%. So it's not a terrible difference between the top and the bottom. They're across 500 lineups.
I have 11% Blue Jay stacks now for what it's worth. That is a number that I feel pretty good about. My most rostered stack right now, the overall, is still the Houston Astros. The team that I'm changing the most right now to get more of is the San Diego Padres. So right before we had started the show, the Padres were a team that looked neutral to maybe a little bit overowned on DraftKings. Not the case anymore. San Diego now has one of the most positive leverage scores on the entire slate. I know something that you had brought up before about them when the game first got delayed. You said you actually liked the San Diego stack. To me, I didn't like them as much at the time, but I don't know if you've looked at the updated ownership for the San Diego Padres. It's pretty funny because now we have the Padres as the most popular offense on all of FanDuel, picking up a 14% ownership share as a team compared to an 8% chance of being a top stack. So we've kind of had the ownership, flip here. It's reversed to the point where they're now a little under-owned on DraftKings and over-owned on FanDuel. With that ownership update, and now the fact that they're the most negatively leveraged stack on the team, is that impacting how you are viewing them at all?
It will once I put it into this process. It'll catch up some of that ownership, and there's a leverage component to how I sort these lineups. So it'll probably shave off. I hope not too many of them because I still do like the spot and I don't mind getting chalky with it. But yeah, it'll probably shave off some of those just through process for sure.
All right. Yeah, my lineups are now updating as well. And basically now the reason I'm updating is for that Padres news. But is there anything here in terms of ownership that really surprises you about any individual offense? Like any team that you think looks really crazy, over-owned or under-owned? Starting with a FanDuel perspective for me, I'm really surprised to see the Tampa Bay Rays picking up nearly 10% ownership as a team. They're the second most negatively leveraged stack behind the San Diego Padres. And it's not even to the point where I look at the Rays and thought like it was, a bad spot or anything or a great spot for them or anything. I'm surprised that the field is getting to them at this clip to where they're one of the most popular offenses on the slate on FanDuel. It was just a team I hadn't really considered all that much. How do you feel about the Rays, or is there any other team that kind of stands out to you as being overowned?
Yeah, the Rays were coming up a little bit for me, but based on that, is another one where as soon as I put it into the sorting tool, based on that massively negative number on the leverage column there, that's going to go away for most of my exposures. I'm not really sure why the field's coming up with it so much. It's not like they're a huge value play on the slate. So just taking a look in terms of what my projections look like. Like I said, it's something where, you know, some of that top end is catching some quality, but I don't consider Joe Ross like a total schlub of a pitcher where I want to really attack him. He has his days, both good and atrociously bad, but it's coming out kind of even in terms of my projection here.
Yeah, I'm like Joe Ross also as a pitcher. I mean, he's one of the more expensive pitchers on the slate, and not that he deserves to be or anything like that, but you know, it's just weird to me that there would be a pitcher who's, you know, that expensively priced because he's pitched fairly well this year, especially as of late, that all of a sudden the field's flocking to. Like, I'm just a little confused why the field's getting the raise that much. So let's see, what are they on DraftKings now? Tampa Bay on DK, currently picking up, where is it? Yeah, they're a little bit over on 2, but not to the extent they are on FanDuel. We have 4.4% projected ownership for them on DK, nearly 10% on FanDuel. So we're winding this down right now. If anybody has any final questions, throw those in. We have a few more minutes we could work with here, and so we have to turn this over to NBA Live Before Lock. That is going to be up next. But guys, if you are still sticking around, I've not done so yet, do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. That is what lets Terry and I keep going on here. And here we go. We got some questions here in the Slack chat from Swanson79. Thoughts on Yankees and Boston stacks on DK? For me, I'm not very heavy on the Yankees today. Boston, I am a little bit overweight to the field on. Do you have any strong feelings on the Yankees or Boston, Terry?
Yanks weren't coming up very much for me at all in this one, which is a little surprising. So I would tend to kind of just trust what I'm getting in terms of my results. I haven't really looked into them specifically on the slate today. It's a team that usually based on the power, I'll get to a little bit, but doesn't seem to be the case here. Getting to a significant amount more Red Sox. So I'm with you on that one. Yeah,
that's I'm higher on Boston. Yankees, I have, let's see, right now, 3% Yankee stacks for me, and then Boston, I am at 8% right now. So definitely lean towards Boston. From my perspective, Jets World is asking Stephen Voigt or Martin Maldonado for DraftKings cash. Let's see, if I'm just looking at individual hitters, I'm way higher on Houston, like I said, than any other offense. So just given that Maldonado's in that lineup, my default answer is going to be Maldonado. He's one of my most rostered catchers today. So I don't know if you have any opinion on individual hitters, Terry, but Voigt or Maldonado?
Just based on the fact that he's in that Houston offense and could potentially get swept up with that, I would say Maldonado. In terms of which player do I think has more potential to rack up his own DFS points, it would be the other kid.
All right. And let's see. Ken Simmons is asking, Terry, on FanDuel, do you do a 4x4 stack or 4 then value in GPPs? I can answer for me. Most of my lineups on FanDuel, I'm only playing on DraftKings today, but for me, most of my lineups on FanDuel typically end up being 4-2 stacks and then 2 value plays. But Terry, what is your typical build on FanDuel?
I prefer the full stacks, so 4-4s, 4-3s with a one-off. But I will allow for some fringier ones like a 4-2 with 2 one-offs or 4-2-2s, things like that to come in around the edges. But my preference is full stacks.
Let's see. Any final questions that we have in the chat here from Jeremiah Johnson? Any thoughts on Miami stacks? Been hitting really well and have had a lot of success off Vince Velasquez. To me, I don't have the Miami Marlins in my player pool. I don't think they're an unplayable stack or anything, but it's a 15-game slate. I have to make a cutoff somewhere, and they're just one of the teams that didn't make my player pool. Also, I generally don't care all that much if teams have had success off an individual pitcher. I know that Terry generally tends to feel the same way, but Vince Velasquez, Miami Marlins, how viable of a stack do you think they are?
I would prefer the Velasquez side of that. I'm getting a little bit of Marlins just because I'm getting a little bit of a lot of teams, but that's not really a spot for me.
Yeah, that is.
And yeah, BVP, just get BVP out of your process, guys. It's not something we want to worry about. I was listening to a thing the other day, or maybe I was reading it, and it was talking about Pedro Martinez back in the day and how dominant he was, and they were quoting Derek Jeter. And Jeter had the most plate appearances of any hitter against Pedro Martinez in his career, in their careers, and it was only 99 plate appearances. If all the times those two teams played, he only faced him 99 times. That's not a statistically significant sample for baseball. You just cannot extrapolate from BVP.
All right. That is going to just about do it for us. We have to turn it over to NBA Live Before Lock. So, guys, we're playing NBA DFS today. Don't go anywhere. Stick around. Watch. I think it's Josh and Lofty do the NBA Live Before Lock show. But before we head off, Terry, any final closing thoughts on the slate or anything that the audience should be aware of?
The audience should be aware that, it looks like Andrew Heaney is the pitcher in my top-ranked lineup that came out of this process, which is weird. It's a strange. There's some Oakland in here with some Padres. It's exactly what I said I'd be stacking, but I didn't expect to have Andrew Heaney on it. The next few have Trevor Rogers, which I trust a lot better.
All right, guys, that is going to do it for us then. Good luck to everybody. Jordan, you can play the music out.